All right, I know you always hear me saying this, but I'm going to wait for about 5 minutes because it looks like we've got about 5 of you here right now, and we're waiting for about another 5. So I'm going to pause this, and we'll start up hopefully in about 5 minutes. All right, good morning. First, can you tell me, can somebody just say yes? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Second, does your screen right now, can you see on it CSS lists?
Yes.
Okay, then we're ready to start. Good morning to everybody. Now, you all know this, that on Monday, what we did was we talked about HTML for virtually the entire period. Yesterday, we talked about CSS for virtually the entire period. We're going to finish our review of CSS, then we're going to go on to the third leg, which is JavaScript. And I'm going to show you, I've come up with what I hope at least we'll find out is a better way for me to get this material to you. And I'm going to explain that to you in about 10 minutes or so, maybe 20 minutes. But so we went over this stuff yesterday in the CSS tutorial. We reviewed that stuff and we were up to here talking about lists. And again, you all know by now there's two types of lists. There are unordered lists, which you create with a UL tag, and there's ordered lists, which you create with an OL tag. Lists have a list style type, which by default is a circle that's colored in. It's called a disc, D-I-S-C. Here they have changed the list style type to circle, so it's a circle that's not colored in. Here they changed it to square. By default, when you create an ordered list, it's numbered, but they changed the list style type here to upper Roman. So you see it's uppercase rather Roman. All right. And there's other stuff. So they show you here how you can set all that. And the only thing I wanted to mention is this. And with this example, what they're using is they're telling you that you can also, for an unordered list, have your own marker. So what they have in here are these. So they've got this purple square in here, but we could do anything. A lot of times people like to put like a little gold star or something at the beginning. And as long as you make it small enough, you can do that. It's no big deal. You just have to have, it doesn't have to be a GIF. It can be a GIF. It can be a JPEG. It can be a PNG. It can be any kind of file you want it to be that holds an image. All right. So we talked about tables yesterday. We got into talking about the zebra striping and stuff. And tables can have borders. You can align the stuff in tables. This one, again, is kind of important. Responsive tables. So as it says, a responsive table will display a horizontal scroll bar if it's too small. But there's ways of getting around that. You can shrink the size of the table as well if you want to do that. So, all right. Yesterday, one of the things I talked about was this display property. And you may or may not remember, but we did a display block. We did a display inline. I showed you the display none. And there's also a display inline block. Those are all mentioned right here. All right. I'm not going to go into that in any more depth or breadth of coverage. All right. Max width and max width can be important. Typically, when you set the width of something, the height will automatically scale. So in other words, in here, if this isn't a good example, but it's typically with images, if you set the width, a lot of times what people do is they'll set the width to 100%, which means have it take up as much of the area that you've designated for it as it can have. All right. Now, there's a lot of other stuff in here. I'm not going to go through most of this, but there's things like position, and it gets to be a little bit complex because there's 5 different ways that you can position things. For instance, there's absolute positioning, where if I put something right here, for example, like where this color picker is, even if I move up and down, that doesn't move on the screen. All right. It can be used, and it depends on what you're using it for. All right. There's an overflow, which you may or may not have heard of. Now, right now, it says the overflow property controls what happens when your content is too big to fit the screen. So you'll notice we've got a container here that's only 100 pixels high, but it's not tall enough, and it may, I guess it is wide enough. All right. But when you set the overflow property, what you say is, do I want it to just hide? All right. Do I want this area to expand? Or what a lot of times what people do is they just say, hey, add these sliders over here as necessary. All right. When I first started to do this class, I was going to talk to you a lot about doing floats. All right. But I didn't know how easy this stuff would or would not be for you. Let me just tell you that if you want something to float, you use the float property. I mean, that doesn't sound surprising, but there's an example of floating to the right. So the picture's way on the right and the text floats around it. So if you look at this example, it's pretty obvious what's going on. And if I change the word right here, if I change it to left and I run it, you see it's just the opposite. So you can float text around images, and not always, but most often, that's the reason you use this float property. The thing you got to remember is if you set up a float, everything keeps floating. It keeps floating, it keeps floating until you clear the float. All right. So you can, when you set up a float here, this is how you'd clear it. And when you do it, you can either do is, so let's say that you've got a float right, you could do a clear right. Sometimes you're not sure, stuff is floating in a funny way. So you can just say clear both. And if there's a float left, it clears that. And if there's a float right, it clears that. If you're at all interested in it, I would suggest you look at the examples they have here because they're pretty good. All right. Again, I don't want to talk about too much of this stuff because I don't want us to get off on too big of a tangent. There's a lot of stuff in here, and a lot of it is important. I mean, you go down to website layout. They show you how this is a common way of laying out a website. All right. And what I mean is you'll have a header up here. This might be a logo or something else. This is your navigation bar. Now we combined our header and our navigation menu when we did the Call Me Mo. So we had the logo over here and the navigation menu was over here. Sometimes you do it separately, especially if you've got a big logo that you want to stand out. We had, sometimes we had one main content area, sometimes we had more. And then you've got your footer on the bottom. So they do a nice job here of not only explaining this, but explaining how you would set it up. And they even set it up piece by piece, which is kind of nice. So if you want to see on your own, if you want to build your own website, this is a terrific place to get started. All right, the units, we talked about these yesterday. So we talked about pixels and we talked about ems, etc. Again, these are those absolute units. And I think I mentioned to you yesterday, you should always try when possible not to use these. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you use pixels. That's probably about the only one of these that I ever use for anything. More often than not, and whenever I can, I use the relative lengths. We talked about these a little bit yesterday. I talked about rems, and I mentioned you can also use ems, but they're a little harder to work with. All right. The other thing that's important in here is I want you to see this view height and this view width. They're actually both important. So, all right. If we come in here and you set the view height and the view width, imagine that you're cutting your screen into 100 pieces, and either 100 pieces this way up and down or 100 pieces this way across. All right. The view height is what you can see on the screen at any one time when it's showing. So if you set it to 100%, that's literally what it's set to. So notice here we've set the font size to 20 VW. If I change that from 20 to 100 and run it, now it's taking up, basically by default, it's taking up 100%. All right. And not only is there a view width, which takes up the entire width, we could also put in here view height. And again, you can see then that by default, that's what it'll take up. Now, I'm not giving it as much due diligence as I should. All right. But again, you might want to take a look at VW and VH because they're used a lot. And I'm trying to go through some of the stuff that's used fairly often in here. Okay. All right. Then next is specificity. And it's like, what is this? Let's just put it in English. Okay. Now, it says there's 4 categories and they give you these math things, etc. And let's just talk about the whole thing and how important it is. All right. If you don't put any CSS into a document at all, if you put nothing into a document, no CSS, guess what? There's still CSS in it because even if you didn't put anything in, the browser puts some stuff in for you. All right. And those are basically built-in styles. Now, what happens here is you typically then will come in and you will put in, some people again put in those inline styles. I mentioned that yesterday, like this. And I said, you should never use that. But if you do use an inline style, they take precedence over all the other stuff that you see here. They're the most important because you are styling an HTML element itself. All right. Then the next most important one is like when we did the H1s and the H2s and the H3s, etc. Those were for an element. Okay. Then the next most important is IDs. IDs are actually more important than classes because remember, you can only have one ID. It's a unique identifier on a page. A class does not have to be unique. So when they talk about specificity, what they're talking about is which one of these takes precedence if you're using all of them. And the answer is the system first looks for your inline styles, then it looks for your IDs, then it looks for your classes and your attributes and your pseudo selectors, then it looks for your elements. All right. What if you don't want that? What if I put something in here for an element and I want it to take precedence over everything, no matter what? Then you can use this special thing that says exclamation point important. All right. And what that means is I don't care what you've set up above. This is the most important thing and make sure you always do it. The problem with using the ampersand or the asterisk, try it again. The problem with using the exclamation point important is a lot of people use it all over the place. It should ideally not be used on a page. And if it is, it should only be used once on a page. Because if you keep doing it and keep doing it, then all of a sudden you've got all these exclamation point important things. And if you get 2 things that are at the same level and they both have the exclamation point important, which one do you use? If they both have it, you go back and you start using these rules that I just mentioned to you. All right, so you can use this. It's called the important rule, but you should use it as little as possible. All right, the advanced stuff, I'm not going to get into this. We talked about colors yesterday and some of the keywords. There are 2 or 3 things I just want to mention, not long at all. But gradients are neat. Gradients are when you fade from one color to another color. And a lot of times you'll use those and you can fade diagonally like this. You can fade top to bottom. You can fade left to right. And there's a lot of ways. All you do is you put in the kind of gradient you want. And notice it says go to the right and go from red to yellow. Here's another one that says another gradient says go to the bottom towards the right. Start with red and end with yellow. So again, if I grab this one and I change it, for example, just so you see it, to blue, oops, just making that one change and clicking run, you can see exactly what happens. Now, if sometimes people actually use these in their backgrounds, but when they do, they're typically something where you would maybe go for even from white to yellow. This is not going to be a good example, but just so you see it. But it's something like that where it's a very soft color where it doesn't overtake your text. All right, but you do see that stuff in there. You do see a lot of sites that put gradients in for a background because they like the way that it looks. All right. You can also work with shadows. We talked a little bit about shadows and their effect yesterday. So if you want to see more on that, so here's text shadows, but there's also box shadows. All right. Where you put the shadow basically as it says there, or you can put borders around stuff. There's all sorts of things that you can do with this. The only thing I always tell my students is sometimes what happens is people create really cool looking websites. The colors are sensational, etc. And they're so good that when somebody looks at the website and they say, hey, what was that website about? You don't even remember. You just remember how cool it was. All right. So never let the medium overtake the message. And what I mean by that is don't come up and create something that is just so wowsy looking that people don't remember the content that's behind it. That's all. All right. If we had more time, we talk about transforms where you can rotate things like this. All right. There's 2D and 3D. See the difference between these if you take a look at them moving. All right. There's transitions. All right. Now it says move the element below to see the transition effect. You can see that. When you mouse over it, it gets bigger, etc. All right. There's animations. Most of these animations that are done in here are fairly simplistic, like you just saw with that one right there. All right. And again, they have their place, but if you use them, don't overuse them. That's the biggest problem that most people have, is that it's like, this is cool. So they use it in one place. Oh, so then they feel like they've got to use it on every page. No. All right. The only other things I want to mention is yesterday we didn't really talk much about styling images. And you'll notice you can use the border radius property so you can take an image and make it look rounded. This is the same image. All right. And all they did here, right here on this one, they set the border radius to 8 pixels. You may or may not be able to tell there is a real little bit of rounding on the corners here. So just so you see this, if I set this to 0 pixels, watch what happens. Now it's totally square. But they set it, let's set it to about 16 pixels. And you see it becomes more rounded looking. And again, if you set something to 50%, then it becomes totally round. And you can play with it. There's a lot of other stuff you can do with it as well. All right. All right. In here, that's most of it. Remember, because we talked about this before, there's their box sizing. We've already gone over that. And we talked about the box model, etc. All right. The box sizing thing is a little bit different. And you might want to take a look at that box sizing property if you get some time. Today, in just a couple minutes, we're going to be talking about JavaScript. And when we talk about JavaScript, one of the first things we're going to talk about with JavaScript is using variables. Well, for years, you could not use variables in CSS. It was not possible, but now you can. All right, so if you want to read that, go ahead and give it a read. You might find it a little bit confusing, but all variables do in CSS is they allow you to set something and remember it if you want to use it someplace else. All right. The other thing I wanted to mention in this area here, we went over that a little bit yesterday, were these media queries, but we went through them kind of quickly yesterday. And it says you could have one set of rules for a computer screen, one for printers, one for handheld devices, one for TVs, etc. All right. And we did it. We did stuff that looked like this yesterday. All right. Now, when you do this and you set up different media types, all means everything. Print means if you set one up, it's just for the printer. Now, if you would please think about this for a second. What if I decided I wanted to print this page that's right here? What if I decided I wanted to do it? All right. It's not that bad. But one thing I'd probably want to do to start with is I'd want to make sure it prints in black and white, because if I printed all this stuff in green and the cyan and blue and red, etc., it's going to take a lot more ink. So a lot of times when you set up your page to be printed, you turn off a lot of things. I might, I want to make sure I don't print this ad here. There's no reason for me to print that. If I had a picture here, I may want to print it. I probably don't want to print this. I don't want to print this. I may or may not even want to, I probably don't want to print this. It's a footer. So when you start thinking about what to print and what not to print, that all comes in play. Screen is exactly what it says there. What's becoming more important today is speech, because there is such a push on today to make websites as accessible for everyone in the world as possible. So if you've got someone who's blind, they should be able to use a website just as easily as someone who's sighted. If you've got someone who's deaf, they should be able to use it just as well. And there's other things that you may not have even thought about. For instance, 10% of people in the world are colorblind. What that means is, if we were to have come in here and let's just say that with this example where I'm going right now, let's say our whole background was this gray, that gray right here. And let's say that we used black, but a real light black. Then if somebody is colorblind, if you make the background and the text color too close, it's very hard for them to be able to tell one from the other. And I know that from firsthand, not from myself, but my older brother was actually originally denied access into the United States Navy because he's colorblind. All right. So like I said, that's worldwide, it's about 10% of the population. All right. The other thing we're not spending any time on, but I just do want you to see it. The two most important newer things, and I spend a week on each one of these in my class, in the classroom. And one is what's called Css Flexbox. And it allows you to go and set things up. We did a very little bit of this yesterday on the example. But if you ever are so inclined, have a read on that, because this does a pretty good job of going through it. But a flexbox is two-dimensional, rows and columns. Sometimes you actually want something that's more three-dimensional. So rather than using Flexbox, you use what's called Css Grid. And Grid works a lot like Flexbox, but it allows you to do things in a 3D format. So you can lay out something that looks like this pretty simply by just setting up a bunch of divs and then setting different properties in here using CSS Grid. All right, that's all I wanted to say from here. So unless anybody has any questions, I'm going to go on. But my question to you is, the stuff we've covered so far, the HTML on Monday and yesterday's CSS, does anyone have any general questions on anything that we've covered that, or something I went over today that doesn't make sense? Anybody? All right, then we're going to start on JavaScript, and I'm not going to go through the tutorial. We will do that tomorrow. That's how we'll start tomorrow, is we'll do a review like we did today. All right, but I want to come in and I want to start on JavaScript. Now, I'm going to ask that you try to do something, and I'm going to quickly change my share. All right, so let's see. I'm going to change it just to screen. It might look the same for you for just a second, but I've got a question. Can you see on the screen, I've got my mouse over it in blue, where it says https://github.com. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. I did something different today. I think you will be able to access it, but I want to show you what I mean. All right. Don't go out there. Don't do anything. But if you would, please watch me do this. All right. Now I'm going to grab this first address that's right here. You don't need this part of it. We could just type in this, I think, but I'm going to type in all of it. All right. So there's all of it. I'm going to copy it to the clipboard and I'm going to paste it right in here. And again, let me go back. I want to make sure you can see my screen all the time. All right. And now I hit enter. And if I do that and I hit enter, try it again. Okay. This doesn't look like much. It probably looks like not much of anything. But what this is this is what's called a repo, which stands for repository, from Jeff Scott, me, from my GitHub account. And the reason that that's important is rather than me having to throw all those files out onto the chat, which doesn't really work all that well, now you should be able to come out here and put in that first address. Then if you click here on the word code and you choose download zip, then what it'll do is in your downloads folder, it'll put all of the files in there. There it is. So I'd like you to all try that right now. So I want you to come in here. Let me bring that back up again. And we're going to practice with the one from yesterday. All right, so let me change my share to make sure you can see it. I'd like you to put this right here. Open up a new window in your browser. Put this in. Do not hit enter yet, but put everything that's in there in blue into your browser. And I'll give you a minute or so, of course, to put that in. All right, then after you've got it put in, and I'm going to leave it up there, it's not going anywhere. But after you do put it in, okay, then, so that's what, I'll put it in here myself again. So I've got https://github.com/JP Scott Ranken, that's me, /call me Mo. So after you put in, again, this, and you hit enter, it should look like this. So my question is, if you put that in and you hit enter, is this what your screen looks like? Can I hear some yes, no, or whatever?
Yeah, I see that.
Can you copy and paste the link into the
Yes, I will. That's a great idea. Thank you. I'll put it in the chat right now. I'll put in the link for both of them. All right. And I'm going to put them in the chat right now. Thank you for suggesting. That's a great idea. All right. They're both in the chat right now. Sometimes when you click on something directly in chat, it doesn't work the way you want it to work. So you're actually best off to just highlight all of this, put it in there yourself, and then just hit enter. All right, it'll work best, I think, that way. Now, at least a couple of you told me this is what your screen now looks like. My hope is that everybody, this is what your screen now looks like. Okay, now, in order to get all of this information here, you click the word code up here, and I'm not going to, this is actually software that's called Git, and Git works with GitHub, and we're actually on GitHub right now. I don't want to explain it to you because we could spend a whole period on that. But if you click code right there, if you click the big green button that says code, and you click download zip, so if you click that, it's going to download all the stuff that's in this thing right here, and it's going to put it into wherever your download stuff goes. All right. Now, once it does that, it's in a zipped format. I have no idea with those of you in here, if you've got the ability to open a zipped folder or not. You should have the ability to do it. But if for instance, if you were doing this from a phone, if you were watching this presentation from your phone, you may or may not have that capability. I don't know. But for me, for example, with this zip file, I right mouse click on it and I choose extract all. So I right mouse click on the name of the zip file. I choose extract all and I click. Then it says, where do you want to put it and what do you want to call it? You can just give it that name. It doesn't matter. You can call it Call Me Mo Master. That's totally fine. And then you click the extract button and that unzips it. So now with this one, there's our website that we worked on the first day. All right. I think that's a much easier way for you to get to your stuff. Now, if some of you go, I don't have it unzipped, I can't get this to work, etc., then I will still copy stuff out on the chat. But it's going to take you longer because you're going to have to keep copying it, moving it over, and doing all that other stuff. All right. Now, if that worked for you, if it did work for you, then what I'd like you to do, let me close a couple of these here. All right. So if it did work for you, let me go back to here and to here. There we go. All right. So if, like I said, if it did work for you, let's see, where are we here? Downloads. All right. If it worked, then what I want you to do is open up another tab in here and copy in that other one. Again, you've got it in the chat and it's right here as well. This is the stuff for today. And if that works, it's going to save us a lot of time. All right. If anybody does need me to put these out in the chat, I will, but it's going to take you more time to copy each one over. And again, when you open up files inside a chat, they don't always open the way that they should. All right. If you put in this one right here, which is the exact same thing, instead of calling Call Me Mo, you put in Day03. All right. That's the only difference. So again, if I do this and I put that one in here and I hit enter, it looks pretty close to what we had before. The stuff in here is different, but I still get that code button right there. I click the code button. On the very bottom, I choose download zip. It puts it into my downloads area, wherever yours is. If I click on that, now it shows it to me. So there it is, Day03 master.zip. So again, if I right mouse click on here and choose extract all and then extract, I now have all of the material for today. Now, I'm not going to ask right now, but I will ask right before we take our first break in about 10 or 12 minutes, did this not work for anyone? And if it did not, I will throw these files out there on chat. But what I'd like to do first, if you look up on the screen here, because this is what you have now. So I've got a question for you. Does your screen right now, in fact, let me do a new share. I want to make sure it looks the way I want it to look here. Remember this thing we worked on yesterday? Everybody remember this? You see the form we worked on yesterday?
Yeah.
Okay. I fixed it. There were a couple mistakes in there. So one of the things that I included in here today was the original file, all fixed, and the CSS. So you've got that stuff in there now. So now if I come in here again, as you saw yesterday, we could put Missouri in. Again, there's no code in here to enforce this stuff. That's what we're going to talk about today. But I could come in here and put in all my information if I wanted to do that. You can see this is all centered. I guess I didn't center that. Okay, so you can fill out all of the information now. If you press reset, the reset works. If you do press submit, it doesn't go anywhere. It shows you here that all the fields are empty because they are. All right. But what I wanted to show you was a working version of the file. So you now have that. All right. So to start with today, it's going to sound a little goofy, maybe, but what I'm going to do is if you've got this screen up right here, keep it up, right mouse click in a blank area here and go to inspect on the very bottom. So right mouse click on a blank area on this form and go to inspect. All right, because we're going to go over something quickly we have not talked about before. We looked at elements. We looked at most of the stuff in here, much of the stuff. We didn't look at this thing. I want you to click up here on the word console. All right. And don't worry if you get errors or anything like that. Don't worry about it. It's okay. What you see then, and hopefully you can see this on my screen. I'm going to type in hello here. All right. And it says hello is not defined. Can everybody see what I just did? Can I get a yes? Anybody? Okay. This is the JavaScript console. So I'm going to start to show you a few things for about 10 minutes, just so you start to understand how you can write programs. Okay, so I'd like you to do this. I want you to type in let my name equal, and then in double quotes, put your name. Now, your name's not Jeff Scott, but you could put that in there. So like that, and then hit enter. And if it comes back and it says undefined, that's a good thing. So please do that. Say let my name equal, and then put your name inside of double quotes. You can use single quotes as well, but I use double quotes almost exclusively. If you did that, you just created your first JavaScript variable. So now JavaScript holds a variable that's called my name. How do I know that? If I type in my name now and I hit enter, notice what it gives me. All right. So let's put in another variable where you put in your age. So you get done and you put in your age right there. All right. Now, just like we did before, you can type in age, and of course, it'll have whatever you put in for your age. That's not a big thing. I do want you to look, though, and you notice that some of this stuff is even color-coded. Right here where it says let, that's a keyword, and you can see that it's kind of a purplish color. When you create your own variable, which is what this is, it becomes blue. So variables show in here in blue. All right. Strings, which is something either in single quotes or double quotes, right there, they go in red, and numbers go in not the same blue as variables, but also in blue. All right. So now we're going to put in our first piece of actual code. We're going to have a message come up, and hopefully this will work. And when we run this, it's going to bring up a little box right here, right up here where I've got the mouse going around like crazy. I want you to type in this, alert. Okay, just like this. My name, oops, my name is my name, and I am now first let me make sure I put it in correctly. So let me hit enter. All right, and it says I'm missing something. So let me see what I'm missing. So I'm going to copy it and put it in again, but not hit enter. All right, my name is plus my name plus and I am age plus years old. I don't want that there. And I don't need a semicolon, but I can put it at the end. Now let's see. My name is, and I am. That should be correct. See the box up here? It says, my name is Jeff Scott, and I am 64 years old. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay. I want you to put in this. So if you put in, let my name equal, and you either put in my name or your own name or somebody's name, and then you set let age equal, and you put in your age or somebody's age, then put in this line right here. This alert line, the bottom one that I've got there. And after you put it in, hit enter and see if you get that alert box that we just saw up there. If you get an error, it'll be in red and pink, like you can see my errors here. Go back and make sure you typed it in exactly the way that I've shown it to you. Did anybody try it and it did not work?
It doesn't work for me because I can't like get where I can't type anywhere.
Can't type anywhere. You can't put your mouse right there and just start typing?
No.
You click the console up here?
The last thing, wait, hold on, let me see. Console. Let me see. Yeah, I'm on. Let me move. There we go. Found it. That's why I was missing the console.
Okay. Now, I'm going to put this in again, but I want to show you something. So I'm going to copy this. You don't have to do it. Just watch if you would. All right. We're going to go about 3 more minutes and we're going to take our first break. But where this says my name, we're putting in JavaScript. And this is what's called a case-sensitive language. So notice I'm going to put a big N in there. And I'm going to put a big A right here. Now we created a variable called my name up here, but now we're trying to use a different variable that doesn't exist. We created a variable named age right here, but we're trying to print out something that does not exist. So notice if I hit enter, it says my name is not defined. It stopped as soon as it got to here. It didn't even find this error because it stopped right here. So if I put this in again, and now I fix the my name, but age is still wrong, and I hit enter, now you'll notice it says age is not defined. What I'm trying to get across to you is the fact that JavaScript is what's called a case-sensitive language. It's case-sensitive. All right. So if it's expecting, if you create a variable that looks like this, where I've got the cursor right here, the mouse going back and forth, it expects that when you use it, that's how you will write it. You won't put any of these in capital letters. All right. This is also one time when you are creating variables, do not, one more time, repeat, do not put blank spaces in your variable names. Just don't do it. You'll get errors if you do. So in other words, if I were to have come down here and said, let my space name equal Jeff, and I hit enter, it says unexpected identifier because it doesn't know what that means. We put let my, and it was expecting that what came after it, my was going to be a variable name and I was going to give it a value. Now it found the word name and it doesn't know how to react. All right. All right. What I want you to know is before we go in, because we're going to write some code. We're actually writing a little bit of code right now, okay? But right now, to try to keep this at least fairly simplistic, between now and you know, when we get back from the break, because we're going to break in just a minute, but when we get back from the break, probably for a half an hour or so, I'm just going to use the console. Then we're going to look at I gave you today 3 JavaScript programs that I wrote last night. They're already done. So we will take a look at those. All right. Now, if anyone tried to get to those files and they couldn't do the unzip, I'm going to take for granted that in the chat, you're going to say to me, I don't see any errors in here right now. So I'm taking for granted. In fact, one person even said that theirs automatically unzipped. Yeah, depending on how your computer is configured, that can happen. All right. And it's actually much easier to do. I'm using a Windows machine. If any of you are using a Mac, it's typically easier, or an Apple machine, it's typically easier to use it on that. So it's 9:50. We're going to take a break, and I will see you back here in 10 minutes. I'm going to start up right at 10 o'clock. I will see you then. All right. One thing you may have noticed is my screen probably looks a lot different than yours right now. If you've got a bunch of junk on the screen, eventually, if I keep putting in all sorts of stuff, and I'm just putting in garbage here, the screen gets filled up and it's very hard to read. So if you want to clear the console, you say console dot clear with parentheses like that. Console, CONSOLE dot clear. All right. And paren, it means it's calling a function. You don't have to worry about that. We're going to get into that in just a bit. But when you hit enter, it clears the screen. So every time it's going to get hard for me to read, I'm going to end up doing a console.clear. Not only that, you can highlight the side of your console window and make it bigger or smaller. Now I'm going to make it just real big. Plus, you can use your flywheel on your mouse to make this bigger if you need to do that. Now, what we just did a second ago was we defined those two variables. So we defined my name, and there it is, and we defined age. Okay, and that's totally fine. All right, but that's what's called hard coding in a value. So in other words, we just put a value in there. And maybe we don't want to do that. Maybe we want to ask the person, what's your name? And maybe we want to ask the person how old they are. So, what I'm saying is we're sort of trying to make a little program here. So we said my name equals, and then double quote Jeff Scott in double quotes. And that made sure that my name was Jeff Scott. I can change that. So I could change that right now. I can say my name equals Jeffrey, just Jeffrey. And now when I type in my name, it's got that in. I can even do something which would be silly to do, but I can do it. I can say my name equals 326. And now when I put in my name, it thinks that my name is 326. So you can do that. But what I want to do is I want to write a program, a little thing on here that asks me what my name is. And then it asks me what my age is. And then it prints out in one of those little boxes that we just saw, my name and my age. Now, when we just printed that stuff out, maybe you noticed this, maybe you didn't. But when we just printed that stuff out a second ago, we used the word alert. And that creates what's called an alert dialog box. And it shows you information. It doesn't allow you to interact with it. It just shows you some stuff. What we're going to do now is we're going to use what's called a prompt, PROMPT. That will actually allow us to enter some information in. And I want to show you what I mean. I want you to type in this. My name equals prompt. What is your name? Just like that. And I'll leave that up there for a second. You already saw, right now my name is 326 because I changed it. But after we do that and you hit enter, Notice what comes up on the screen. This is a prompt dialog box, and it says, what is your name? So that text you see right there is whatever text we put in here. So now if I come in here and I put in Jeff and I hit enter, now it says my name is Jeff. So if I type in my name again, you can see it's Jeff. So let's put in another one of these. Oh, I wanted to mention this to you also. When you set this up, and we did that my name, this one right here, we can give it what's called a default value. So I could have put in here Bob. Oops, you don't need that. All right. So notice it automatically puts a value in there. And if I don't change that value and I just hit enter, boom, now my name is Bob. All right. Now, what I just showed you works just fine. But what I do want you to understand is that when I go and do this, when I go and put this line of code in here like this, whatever I type into here, whatever it is, it's a string. In other words, it's not a number. Even if I put in here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's not the number 12,345. It's a string. It's, if you say, I don't know what a string is, well, the address of Ranken Technical College in Wentzville is 751 Parr Road. That 751 is not 751. It doesn't have any numerical value. So anything that you put into here doesn't have any numerical value either. All right. So who cares? Why should you care? Well, I'm going to show you in just a second. All right. So let me clear my screen. And I'm going to put back in again my age, or my name rather, equal prompt, what is your name? Okay. And I'm going to put in my real name. So I'm going to put in Jeff. Okay. So now it's in there as Jeff. Now I'm going to put in another one of these, but I'm going to have it say age equal prompt. Now, don't type this in yet, because what is your age? And I could give it a default value. Let's just say we put in here 21. That would work. But whatever we put in here, it's still a string. It's not a number. We want to go and convert whatever they put in there into a number. So what we do is we put in this. And again, this is case sensitive. That I has to be an uppercase I. Just like that. So I'm going to give you a second. If you would, please type that in. After you type it in and you hit enter, brings up another prompt and it asks you your age. Well, if I want to put in 64, boom. Now it's set my age to 64, but it's the number 64. It's not the string 64. All right. And believe me, I'm gonna be writing some code for you, and we're gonna go over all this stuff. But this is the easiest way to start explaining this stuff to you. It may or may not seem easy, but it's the easiest way. So now I've set my name and my age. So now I can come in here with an alert, and I can say, like we did before, my name is, and I am this year's old. So let's see if that still works. My name is Jeff and I am 64 years old. So what you have just learned, or what we have learned so far, is first, we learned how to create a variable. And what's a variable? It's something that can change. My name is a variable. Age is a variable. All right. And we use the word let when we start to create a variable. Okay. And then we learned how to do an alert. So we could have something like this print on the screen to show us output. Then we learned how to input things. Something that was numeric here and something that was non-numeric. I want to bring this one back up here and I want to show you something. All right, so I'm going to run this one again. And when it runs, I'm going to put in here hello. Anybody have any idea what I'm going to get back for an answer? Let's try it. NaN. How about this? Can someone take a wild guess what NaN stands for? Anybody want to guess?
Not a number.
That's exactly correct. Good job. Not a number. Because what we put in was non-numeric. It's expecting a number, and I put in something that was not a number. All right. So if I come back and put in 64 again, and then come back and do this alert again, hopefully it'll be back and it'll be correct. All right. So again, what we've looked at is I showed you how to create simple variables using the word let followed by a variable name. First, we used let in a variable name, and then we said equals, like let my name equal Jeff, let age equal 64. All right. Then we went in and actually asked the user to enter that information. All right. So let's add a little bit more to this right now. I'm going to clear my console again. We've already got values in there for name, and we've got values in there for age. I think you'd agree with that. But I'm going to put this in. If age is greater than 18, and one of these curly braces, and I'm going to put in here alert, you can vote. All right. And then another one of these curly braces. Okay. And it says you can vote. Why did it say that? Because my age is greater than 18. But what if you're not older than 18? What if you're not older than 18? Then what do you do? All right, we'll fix that in just a minute. But notice it says this. Now, I'm going to do this again. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to reset my age. So I'm going to say age equals 10. All right. Now, I'm going to run this again. Anybody have any guesses what'll happen when I hit enter? Nothing, because I'm not greater than 18. Well, what if I want to put something in there? So let's bring this back again, and we'll say this. And after this, we're going to put in the word else, and I'm going to say alert, sorry, you're too young to vote. And notice it says, sorry, you are too young to vote. And it says that because we set our age to 10. Now, what I'm showing you now is what's typically called selection. So if something is true, you do this. And if it's just an if it's not true, you do nothing. You already saw that. Here we're saying if this is true, then do this. If this is not true, then skip this, but do this. That's how a lot of programming works. I just want you to understand that's a lot of how programming works. All right. Now, hopefully it's making, even if it's just a little bit of sense, that's a great start. All right. But I'm going to write something that's going to be a little bigger now. Okay. So bear with me for a second. You can write this or you can just watch, whatever is easiest for you. Let me clear. And this is a little big, so I'm going to make it there a little smaller. There we go. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say this. I'm going to say let size equal prompt. Please enter your size. And I'll put in here small, medium, large, or extra large, something like that. and we'll give it a default value of small. Okay, so when we run this, it's going to ask us our size. So let's say that I'm a medium. So I'm going to put an M in here and I'm going to hit enter. All right. Now, if I type in size right here, I'm not going to, but if I type in size, it's going to come back and say M. All right. But what I want to do is I want to say, if what you entered was an S, you're a small. Otherwise, if what you entered was an M, you're a large. Otherwise, if what you entered is an L, I'm sorry, if you put it in S, you're a small. If you put it in M, you're a medium. If you put it in L, you're a large. If you put it in XL, you're an extra large. If you put in anything else, I don't know what your size is. So that's what I'm going to write right now. So if size, 3 equal signs, equal S, all right, I'm going to do an alert that says your size is a small. Okay, just like that. And then I'm going to put in one of these curly braces. You don't have to line things up like little soldiers like I'm doing, but it sometimes makes it easier to read. Else, if size equal M, I'm going to do an alert that says your size is a medium. All right. Else, if your size equal an L, then you do an alert that says your size is a large. Else, if the size you put in was equal to XL, then we're going to put in an alert that says your size is an extra large. And if it's none of those, we say else, and we say your size is unknown. All right. So we hit enter, and it says your size is a medium, because when we first ran this, I put in an M. So what you have here, this is what's referred to as an if else if block. So if this is true, if we had put in an S there, we do this and you skip everything else that's left. You just skip it. But if this is false, then you check to see if this is true. And if that's true, you do this and you skip all of that. If the first one is false and the second one is false, you check to see if this one is true. And if that one is true, then you print out your size as a large. If it's not an S, and if it's not an M, and if it's not an L, then you check to see if they put in an XL. If they did, you put in your size as an extra large, and you skip this. If they don't put in an S, and they don't put in an M, and they don't put in an L, and they don't put in an XL, you put in your size is unknown. Okay, so when we first did this, since we put in M, okay, that's what it did. Now I'm going to put in the code. The bad thing about doing it like this in here inside of the console like this is I've got to keep putting the code in again. All right, so I'm going to just grab what we put in and I'm going to put it in again. but there's a reason for showing you this. So I'm going to put in the same code again, and now I'm going to put in hello, which doesn't make any sense, but I put in hello anyway. All right. Now I'm going to copy the same code in again and put it in here and hit enter. And it says your size is unknown because I put in hello, which was not an S and not an M and not an L and not an XL. So it fell all the way down to the bottom and it did this. So what I've just shown you is pretty complex stuff. All right. And you might say, well, that wasn't that hard. And I'm not saying it was or was not hard. All right. But you've got to realize that when you are working with a computer, most computers have the intellect, they have the intelligence of a kid who is 18 months old. That's a year and a half. Why am I telling you that? Because if you've got a little kid that you're babysitting that's a year and a half old, they understand some stuff. They wouldn't understand how to do this, wouldn't make any sense to them. All right. But with a little kid, when they don't understand what you're talking about, what do? Well, sometimes you talk louder because, of course, that'll make them listen, but it may or may not. But to the computer, what do people do when they get mad? Because I watch it all the time. They start hitting their keyboard real hard. That doesn't help either. All right. Now, I want to show you something else. All right. I want to put in that same size thing that we put in before. Okay. And it doesn't matter which one of these. I can pick one. That's totally fine. All right. But I'm going to put in here. Now I'm going to put in here XL in lowercase. Now, if I were to add all that code that I put in here before, it would come back and say the size was unknown. Because little XL does not equal big XL. How can I fix that? I can say this. I can say size. You can see what it is right there. It's little XL. But I'm going to say size equals size dot to uppercase. And now, lo and behold, now look what the size is. We just changed it to capital letters. All right. And again, I realize when I'm showing you, you might say, well, big deal. It is a big deal when you're starting to code. All right. So rather than writing that big thing of ifs before, which we could do, rather than writing that, I'm going to write it another way. And I'm going to use what's called a switch statement. So I'm going to do a switch on the size. And I start with a curly brace and I end with a curly brace down here. And then in between there, I put in this case S. Whoops. I wish I hadn't hit enter, but I did. Got to do it again. All right. So I say case S, alert, you are a small. Why does it keep, oh my goodness. I guess I shouldn't have that there. That's probably what the problem is. Let me try this again. There we go. Break. All right. Then I'm going to say case, oops, case M. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, we're going to write one of these. You'd say case S and like this, then you'd have another one with an M, etc. So let me grab this and I'm going to rewrite it and then paste it back in again. I'm going to rewrite it in a different editor just to make it easier, because otherwise we're just going to run into some problems, which I don't want you to do. So give me a second here. Don't worry if you can't see this, you will in about 30 seconds. Depending on how fast I can type, maybe 45 seconds. All right, so S, M, L, XL and default. Small, you are a medium, you are a large, you are an extra large, and your size is unknown. All right, so let me go and copy that back in so you can see it. All right, so I'm going to clear my screen. And now I'm going to paste this in. Now, it might be kind of hard for you to read. I'm going to make it a little smaller so we can see everything, even if it's small. Now, what this says is, okay, this is just like that if we wrote, but we're saying if the case is an S, we want to again do an alert that says you are a small, then break, which means get the heck out of here. If we don't put the word break in, let's say we left the word break out of all of these. We didn't put it in once. All right. Then what's going to happen then is if it's an S, it's going to print this one, and then it'll fall right through and it'll print this one. Then it'll fall right through and print this one. Then it'll fall right through and print this one. Then it'll fall right through and print this one. Because the break is a special word to the language that means get out of this case. Get out of this. It's called a switch statement. Get out of the switch. So now I've got all this code, okay? Let me copy it and let me, all right. Notice it says you are a extra large. I don't know if that's what I put in there now first or not, but I'm going to try to run it again. So I'm going to clear my screen. All right, and I'm going to put in that prompt again. Let size, and we'll put in one that we have not used. All right, which is, I don't know if we used an XL or not. Well, let's just put in M for medium. All right. Now I'm going to put in the rest of that code that I put in here. So now it's going to come in and it's going to say, okay, was the size an S? It wasn't, so it's going to skip this. Was it an M? Yes, it was. So it should say you're a medium. It should hit the break and it should get out. All right, so let's see if indeed that's what happens. You are a medium. So what I just showed you here, all right, was something very important. When we started writing our code here, when we first started doing this, we just went one line after another. That's doing things in sequence. All right, and that's totally fine to do. So we did it in sequence. Now what we're doing, this is called selection. If you use either the if statement or the switch, it's kind of like, you know, you're driving down this road, and now the road ends. And in our case, we can go in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different directions. So we can go north, south, east, west, or something that's unknown, for example. All right. And this is pretty big stuff. So I've shown you sequence, which is just one line after another line. And now I showed you selection, which is using either if or if else, or if else, if, except, you know, if else, or using the switch with cases. All right. There's another important thing that I want to show you before we start looking at some actual regular code projects. And that is what's called looping. So what I want to do is I want to print out the numbers from 1 to 10. Everybody with me? I want to print out the numbers from 1 to 10. I could do an alert. I mean, the easiest way would be to do this. I could type in alert 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I could do that. All right. And it says I'm missing a parenthesis in my argument list. Well, what it doesn't like is it's assuming this is going to be in double quotes, even though they're numbers. So there it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's not hard. You could all do that. All right. What if I asked you to print the numbers from 1 to 100? Would take you a little while longer. And what if I asked you to go from 1 to 1,000? Probably take you most of the rest of the day if you're like me. All right. So I'm going to show you here 3 different ways that we can print out the numbers. We'll just use 1 to 25 on the screen with just a couple lines of code. So let me clear again. All right. So I'm going to do this. Just let me put the whole thing in and then we'll go over it. So let LCV equal 1. All right. While, in fact, we're going to make another variable here too. Say let str equal nothing. All right. While LCV is less than or equal to 25, str plus equal LCV plus a blank space. All right, because it'll look a little nicer that way. LCV plus plus. And I don't expect any of this to make sense to you. That's totally fine. But watch what's going to happen in just a second. All right. Now, it says 25. Don't worry about that. I'm going to type in here alert else str. And notice what we have. The numbers 1 to 25. Right there. And if we change that from 25 to 2500, it would print all of them out. This box would get pretty big, but we could do that. So let's go over all the lines of code that are in here. All right. So this first thing, this is a variable, and that variable, this is going to be a variable that's going to control a loop. It is a loop control variable. This is our loop right here in blue. So I oftentimes, if I'm using a loop control variable, I call it LCV, for loop control variable. So I'm saying right here, start at 1. All right. And then I've got this thing that's str, and that's what I'm going to alert at the end. I want it to be equal to nothing. If I put in 2 double quotes like that, that's known as the empty string, which means there's nothing in it at all. All right. Then I'm saying, hey, while that loop control variable is less than 25, well, it's 1, and that's less than 25. So the string is now equal to LCV, which is 1 plus a blank space. This line right here that you see, this LCV plus plus, that's the same thing as saying LCV equals LCV plus 1. We could have done that. So this is going to loop through here 25 times. So after it does it the first time, string is going to be equal, it's equal to nothing. So we add the 1 to it in a space. Then we add 1 to it. Now it's 2. So it's 1 space, 2 space. We do it again. Now it's 1 space, 2 space, 3 space. We have to put this line of code in here. If we never put in that line of code, LCV would always be equal to 1. So it would go loop forever, and it would go 1 space, 1 space, 1 space, 1 space, 1 space, 1 space. All right. So again, just to show you this, I'm going to grab this same thing that we just did right here. Okay. And I'm going to change that from 25 to 200. All right. And I'm going to hit enter. And again, I'm going to say alert str. And you can see it's so big that it's part of it's off the screen. But it's got all the numbers in it from 1 to 200. They're all in there now. So when you want to repeat a bunch of code over and over and over again, when you want to do that, you use a loop. So imagine that you learn how to program, and now somebody tells you to write a payroll program for GM. And let's say that the GM in Wentzville has 10,000 workers. And let's say they all get paid the same way, 40 hours a week, you know, etc. They all do the same kind of work. Well, I could write this 10,000 times, but that would be pretty stupid. It would make sense to write it once and put it into a loop that went 10,000 times. All right. Now I'm asking you, I want to ask you a question. I'm going to keep all this stuff up here, but I'm going to change the value of LCV and I'm going to set it equal to 100 right now. Okay. So I just did that. And now I'm going to put in this. And I realize it's a little hard for you to see, but I wanted to keep as much of that on the screen as I could. I've got a question for you. LCV is equal to 100. All right. And I want to say while it's less than or equal to 25. Can anybody tell me how many times that loop will run? I set it equal to 100, and I said while it's less than or equal to 25. Can anybody take a wild guess? How many times do you think that loop will run? Anybody?
75.
That was a good guess, actually, because that's 100 minus 25. What it does right here is this is a test. So I'm asking you this question. If we set LCV to 100, is 100 less than or equal to 25? No, it's not going to run at all. It won't run once. If I hit enter, notice it didn't even give me a value back. And if I do an alert on str, okay, that was in there from before. I don't know why that's still in there, but there's nothing in there. All right. And actually it's got the value from before. So let me reset str. So str equals nothing. All right. Now let me run this again. We'll say LCV equals 100 and we'll run the loop again. All right. So while it's less than or equal to 25, now we'll say alert str. And notice there's nothing in there. So when you've got a loop like this, it checks before you run the body of the loop. The body of the loop is whatever you put between these curly braces. I could put 100 lines in here if I wanted to. All right. And I realize this is kind of hard. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep on this for about 10 or 15 more minutes. We're going to take another break, and then we're going to go back and look at some of the programs I've already written. And we're going to go through them really, really slowly. All right. And that's what's going to be on tap for most of the rest of today. All right. This stuff is dry. I'm not saying it's not. Okay. But somebody who's a good JavaScript programmer like this, they usually make over $100,000 a year. And I'm not just saying that. All right. Regardless of where they work, because you can make a lot of money doing this stuff. All right. So I'm going to do one more thing here. And that is, I'm going to show you two more ways to write this same loop. All right. So we just wrote the loop with a while, but now we're going to write it a little differently. We're going to say this: for LCV equal 1, LCV less than or equal to 25 plus LCV. And then we're going to put in here at str plus equals LCV plus a blank space. All right. And then that's all we're going to put in here, period. Okay. And then we will do an alert. You can see already what the answer is. We'll do an alert of str. And we got it. But that's a lot less code than what we had before. This is another way of writing a loop. It's called a for loop. When we wrote the other one, we had to write all of this stuff. We had to say, let LCV equal 1. Now, if I hit enter now, I'm going to get an error because we've already got a let in there. So I'm just going to say LCV equal 1. This is what we did before. Then we said, while LCV, in fact, let's reset str. str is equal to nothing. While LCV is less than or equal to 25. And then we came in here and we said str plus equal LCV plus a blank space. Then we said plus plus LCV. Oops. And we ended our curly brace and we said alert str. And just like you saw before, there's the numbers 1 to 25. This and this do the same thing. But when you write it as a while loop like this, you've got to initialize your variable, then test your variable, then change the value of your variable. And as you can see, it's done in 3 lines of code. When you use a for loop, you initialize your variable, you test your variable, and you change the value of your variable all in 1 line. They work very similarly, but this one results in less code. You have to know exactly how many times you're going through the loop with this one. You don't with that one. All right. But this says initialize. So set my variable called LCV equal to some initial value. That runs 1 time. This is going to run every time to check to see if my LCV is less than or equal to 25. If it is, I do what's in the curly braces. Then I come back up and I add 1 to it and I test it again to see if it's still less than or equal to 25. If it is, I do it again. I come back up, I add 1 to it, I test it again. This happens 25 times. Then after the 25th time, it comes back up here and it adds 1 to LCV, making it 26. Since 26 is not less than or equal to 25, it falls out of the loop. And that's exactly what happens in here as well. All right. And I want to show you one more thing about this, and that is, let me leave that one out. All right. I'm going to set this equal to 100. All right. And first, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say str equals nothing. All right. And now I'm going to go and run this again, but I'm starting it at 100. And I hit enter. Now, if I type in an alert of str, there's nothing in there because I can't count forwards from 100 to 25. I can only count backwards. So what if I wanted to do this and I wanted to do it, but I wanted to count backwards? All right. Then instead of saying plus plus, I can say minus minus to remove 1. Now, when I come in here and I put in my, get rid of that. And I, whoops, oh, I put in 1 too many curly braces. So let me just put it in again. I got to clear because I'm running out of room on the screen. So now I've got this. All right. And if I come in here, let's see, and I say, okay, I'm done now. And I do an alert of str. Now notice how it's different. It says nothing because I can't go from 100 while it's less than or equal to 25 because 100 is not less than or equal to 25. So how do I count backwards? All right. So while it's equal to 100 and while, all right. So what if I want to count backwards? I want to go from 10 to 0 and I want to say blast off when it's done. So let's say we want to do that. Let's write that right now. All right. So I'm going to reset my string equal to nothing because I don't need that anymore. Okay. Now I'm going to come in here and say for LCV equal 10, LCV less than or equal to 1 minus LCV. All right. And I'm going to say what I'm going to not do anything, but when it's done, when it's all done, I want to do an alert here that says blast off. Now that's still going to work. Okay. Oh, I didn't put in an ending curly right there, or ending double quote. The point is, this isn't going to work. That will say blast off. There it is. But this doesn't work because it's not possible for you to go and say, hey, I'm at 10 while I'm less than or equal to 1, because I'm not. So I wouldn't write it like that. All right. What if I always want to go through a loop at least one time, no matter what? I always want to go through it. Well, I showed you quickly a while loop. I showed you quickly a for loop, but now I'm going to show you a different kind of loop that's called a do while loop. So again, I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to say our string is equal to nothing. And we will set our loop control variable equal to 1. And we're going to say do. And I'm going to put in here, let's see, str plus equal, like we did before, the LCV plus nothing, just like we did before. All right. And then we're going to add 1 to our LCV. You can either say plus LCV, or you can say LCV plus plus. And that plus only works if you want to add 1 to something. Okay. Or you can say LCV plus equals 1. Oops. Or you can do it the hardest way, which is to say LCV equals LCV plus 1. Any of those ways will work. All right. Now I'm going to come down to here and I'm going to say while LCV is less than or equal to 25. Okay. And I'm going to do an alert of str. And you'll notice again, I get my numbers. But there's a really big difference between this loop and the other ones I showed you. This one doesn't check until the loop already has been run through. So even if I come in here and I say LCV equals 1000, and you all know that 1000 is not less than or equal to 25. But if I put this in and hit enter, and again, I put in my alert of str, it says, oh, I didn't clear it first, but it says 1000. All right, I should have cleared the string first. Let me do that. So I'm going to do this one last time for you. So I'm going to come in here and say LCV equal 1, str equal nothing. All right. Then just like I just showed you, we're going to do this. All right. In fact, let's set it equal to 1000. LCV equals 1000. All right. And LCV, you can see it is 1000. And we're going to say do this while it's less than or equal to 25. All right. Now we're going to do an alert of str. And notice it only has the number 1000 in it. What I'm trying to get across to you is it ran through the loop one time. It did run through it. Okay. Now we're going to take a break in a minute, but I have a question for you first. If I put a number on the screen, so let me do a console.clear here. All right. If I put a number on the screen, that number right here, is that an odd number or an even number? I'm asking you. Is that odd or even? It's not a trick.
Odd,
Okay, why?
because the number in the tens place is odd.
Because when you divide it by 2, there's a remainder. If we put 38 here, that's an even number. And you know that because you can divide that by 2, right? So when we come back from our break at 11 o'clock, we're going to look at the first program. We're not going to run it in here, but what I will want you to do is in what I gave you before. All right, when we went in here and we did that day 3 stuff, all right, I'm going to want you to open up the one that says, I think it's number guessing game. All right, no, that isn't it. I'm sorry. I want to give you the right one to open up. Where is it? Is it index? All right, well, I got to find it. Where is it? Guessing game, JS. Don't tell me I didn't put that one in here. Well, I'll find it during the break. How's that? And if I have to, I'll put it out in the chat window. I thought it was out there and maybe it's not. But we're going to look at a real simple JavaScript program, a whole program that you can run over and over and over again to find out if a number's odd or even. All right. So it is 10:50. I'll see you back here at 11 o'clock. All right, before we start back up, 2 quick things. First, you've already heard me say this at least once, if not more than once. Remember, if you want to send me in a picture of you, what I will end up doing sometime either this weekend or early next week, this is the one from the class last week. All right, these are some of the people who were in the class. These are some of the people who were in the class that did not provide pictures. This is the stuff we worked on last week, etc. I'm going to make another one that's going to look like this one. And it would be nice if I had your pictures. Now, I'd notice I only use your first names. I would never put anybody's last name in there. And if there was a young man last semester that his nickname was Bugsy, and he wanted me to put Bugsy in there. So I did. That's okay. But if you want to take your picture or have your parent or whatever take your picture, make sure that if you do that, send it to me in an email on jpscott@ranken.edu and make sure that I know what your name is. Okay. And if you don't want to do it again, you don't have to. But if you do, like I said, probably this weekend, I'll create something like this. We'll have different projects, of course, but the rest of it will look pretty similar to the way this looks. I might change the coloring around. Where it's yellow, I might make it purple, and where it's purple, I might make it yellow. I don't know. That's not that big a thing. Now, for whatever reason, and this is on me, I apologize for this in advance. One of the files we're going to work on right now, I did not give to you. So I put it out here on the chat. All right. I don't like doing it that way, but that's the way I'm going to do it. And I'd like you to go out to the chat. It's called odds or evens.html. Click on it to open it. And unfortunately, it's going to look like this, and it's going to ask you to play the game. So I come in here, and I will put in 36 is fine. It'll say that it's even, and it says, do you want to do it again? I'll put in N for no, and it's done. But I want you to get it so where it's right here, then right mouse click and choose View Page Source. We did this yesterday with one of the files. All right. Do you all, is there anybody who doesn't understand what I'm asking you to do? All right, somebody put down that they can't see the file. Let me try to add it again. All right, so I'm going to make sure I add it for everyone. File, your computer, odds or evens, JPS. There it is right there. Everybody should be able to see it. All right. And, hopefully you see the file now. So take your mouse, click on it where it says click to open. Good. I'm glad you see it now. So click on right here where it says click to open. When it does, it's actually going to run the program for you. So it's going to look like this. It says you are starting a new game. That's totally fine. Click OK. And just click OK again. And click OK again. Now, when it asks you want to do it over again, don't say Y for yes. Just put in anything else. So I'm going to put in an H, and it'll stop it. Once your screen looks like this, right mouse click on the empty screen like this, and choose View Page Source, not Inspect, View Page Source, which is right here. This has got your whole program on it. So we want to highlight the whole program. The easiest way is to hold down on your Control key, which is in the bottom left-hand corner of your keyboard. So do a Control A to highlight all of it, Control A, and then a Control C to copy it. All right. Then you can go into your Visual Studio Code, and we can just come in and add it as a new file, and like what we were working on yesterday would be totally fine. So I'm going to add a new file in here, click there, and I'm going to just call it odds or evens, odds or evens .html. And in this brand new blank file, I'm going to paste in, all right, I'm going to paste in what I just had you put in. Now, if for some reason you go, hey, I tried doing that, it didn't work, then I'll tell you what, for now at least, just watch what we're doing. Because the programs we'll work on after lunch, you do have those. All right. But if for some reason you couldn't do what I just asked you to do, it says my thing is froze. So let me do a new share. Can everybody see on my screen right now? Can you see this where it says create a simple odds or even number? Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay. So if it was frozen before, I'm sorry.
What
All right.
folder are we creating this in?
You can put it really anywhere you want. I just put it in the same one we were working on yesterday that had that form that we did yesterday afternoon, but it really doesn't matter. But I want to go over the entire program because I want you to hopefully have some kind of an idea of what's going on here. And even after we go over it, programming is not easy. It's called a programming language because you're learning a new language. And I remember, I'll give you try to make it a very quick little story. When I was a senior in a high school, so when I was in my last year in high school, what they did was all people who were seniors, they got to come in a day later than everybody else. That was our reward, I guess, for becoming seniors. So I walked into school, which was really the second day of school. I walked into a class I was taking, a Spanish class. And there were people talking Spanish in there, but I didn't know any Spanish. I thought, what's going on here? Well, what happened was they just taught them a little bit of stuff, maybe 10, 20 words, and they were saying those words back and forth. That's kind of what you're learning in here, is just a little bit to get started. All right. But like I said, it's called a programming language because you're learning a new language. So it says create a simple odds or evens number. Now, this is inside of a file that's an HTML file. So this is a comment. Everything you see there is a comment. We've already talked about comments before. They're ignored by the system. You put it in there so we can understand it. So this program, when we run it in a minute, it allows you to input a whole number, and then it tells you if the number is 0, because 0 is not odd and 0 is not even, or if it's odd, or if it's even. But it also tells you one other thing that I put in there later. So if the input is non-numeric, or if the number is 0, neither odd nor even. All right. So hopefully, at least when we run this in a minute, you'll at least understand what this program does is it brings up one of those prompt statements that tells you to enter a number. If you put in something, if you leave it blank, or you put in something that's not a number, like if you put in hello, all right, then it's going to register as being not a number. If you put in, let's say, 50, it'll ask if it'll check to see if 50 is evenly divisible by 2, and it is. So it'll say that it's even. If we run it again and we put in 27, then it's going to say, is 27 evenly divisible by 2? It's not. So it's going to say it's odd. If we run it again and we put in 0, it's going to come back and say that 0 is not even and it's not odd. So depending on the input we put in, what we get out of it, or what's known as our output, will be one of 4 things. Not a number, 0, odd, or even. And it'll print out an associated message. All right. Then when the game ends, it will say to the user, hey, would you like to run this program again? So it'll give him or her the opportunity to run the program another time. I'm asking this question. Does the concept of what we're doing here, does it not make sense to anyone? Please be honest. All right. So guess what? You already know all this stuff. Every bit of that. We talked about doc type on day 1. We talked about the HTML tag on day 1. Now, I didn't put it in here, but we could have put in lang equal en like we've been doing. All right. Our head section is real simple. All it has in is that meta tag and the title. I kept this real simple. All right. Now this says, this is new. This says when the game begins, I'm sorry, when the program loads, call a routine that's called start new game. And if you go down here, you'll notice there's a thing that's called a function that's called start new game. And that's all of it right here. So this code will be called when the program gets loaded into the memory of the computer. In other words, when you run this. Okay. Now, when you put JavaScript inside of this, if you remember, when we talked about CSS yesterday, I talked about inline CSS, and I said you really should never put CSS inside immediately inside of your HTML. And then we looked at the style tags. Well, we don't use style tags here. We use script tags. I could have put this into another file, but I didn't want to have to keep bopping back and forth between the files. So when the program begins, call this routine that's called start new game. We're going to go over that in just a minute. Now, and again, my teaching, the way that I teach is I try to explain things typically first by not using computer examples. I just try to use real world examples because sometimes they make more sense to people than using computer examples. So what do I mean? Well, when I was going to high school, I had a friend named Scott who was in a band. And Scott had 2 guitars. He had an electric guitar that he used in band, and he had like a folk or an acoustic guitar that he used when he was just playing around the house. And I asked him once, he was playing his electric guitar when I came over to his house, and I said, have you ever been on stage with an electric guitar like that? Have you ever been on a stage and had a string break? And he said, yeah, and it's really a pain. I said, well, what do you do if a string breaks and you're in the middle of a song? And he said, I don't want people to be able to tell, so I kind of cheat. I go over to my amplifier and I turn it up louder so they really can't tell. All right. What I'm trying to tell you is JavaScript is both the best language, it's both the best computer programming language to learn, and it's the worst. And it's the best and the worst for the same reason. If you forget to do things in JavaScript, JavaScript will do them for you. And that's not, it's a bad thing, because you can develop really bad habits that when you go to other programming languages that are not JavaScript, then sometimes you've got these bad habits and they're hard to get over. And that's a bad thing. The good thing is, when you're learning how, if you forget to do something, it typically guesses what you want and it does it for you. And more than 99 times out of 100, it guesses correctly. All right, it guesses it correctly. All right, so why am I telling you that? Because when you put this line of code in here that you see in blue right now that says using strict, when you put that line of code in, what you're telling JavaScript is, hey, don't be so lax with your rules. All right, you're trying to make it more so that it follows the rules of other programming languages. So it's a lot stricter in what it does. All right, if you go, I don't know what that means, you don't have to. I'm just telling you that's why I put that line in there. All right, now then we've got 5 different variables that we're creating right here. 5 different variables. Notice that every time I'm declaring 5 variables here, and then off to the side, I'm using the other way you can make comments. We made a comment up here, but now we're inside of JavaScript. So we can make a comma by just putting, or a comment rather, by just putting in / /. This just explains what this variable is. This explains what this variable is. This, what this variable is, etc. Now, notice that with all 5 of these, all 5 of them, I did not say let something equal something else. You may or may not remember this from what we looked at a little bit ago, but when we had this thing up on screen, where are we? Let me get rid of this. And don't worry if you can't see my screen, you will in a second. All right. But if I go into inspect and I go back again to console, which is what I'm going to do right now. If you can't see it, you will in a second. I'm going to change my share. All right. Do you remember we did this before? We said like let age. Okay, I'm going to come in here and say let my age equal 64. All right. Now my age, if I type that in, it comes back 64. You already saw this. There's nothing new there. But what if I create right now, right on the fly, I'm going to create a new variable that I'm going to call salary. If I type in salary by itself and hit enter, it says that it's not defined. Means I don't have a variable called salary. So if I create one, but I don't give it a value, if I just say let salary and I hit enter, now if I type in salary, it tells me that its value is undefined. What does that mean? That means I didn't give it a value yet. That's all it means. It means that I've got a variable called salary that I did not give a value to. So why, who cares? Why am I telling you that? Because with all 5 of these variables that you see right here, all of them right now have a value of undefined. So number input has no value. Is NaN, which is short for not a number, has no value. Is 0 flag has no value. Is odd flag has no value. And is even flag has no value. So these right here are called variable, right here, variable declarations. Because I am declaring 5 different variables. If I had done this, I'm going to remove it right away. But had I come in there and said this, let number input equal 27. I mean, that'd be silly to do, but if I had done that, this part of it is declaring the variable. This part of it is initializing the variable. So it's saying create a variable and give it an initial value. And what I'm telling you is with these 5 variables that we put in, we are declaring them, but we are not initializing them. All right. Now, what's next? Well, we've got a thing here that says function start game, and that's what gets called right here when the program starts. Okay, so what's a function? It's something that does return something. So for instance, what functions allow you to do is they allow you to modularize a program. And what that means is you can break up a program into pieces. All right. When I was going to college, for 2 years while I went to college, I rented a house from a guy. It was actually a real, he called it his doll house. It was a little house behind his house. It had 1 bedroom in it. It had 1 bathroom in it. It had a very small living room in it, and it had a small kitchen in it. And I lived there by myself. It was a real small house. Sometimes I'd come home, and even though it was small, it got really dirty. I didn't do the dishes all the time. I didn't make the bed. I didn't clean up, papers, etc. So sometimes I'd come home and I'm like, geez, I got to clean the house tonight. And it was like, that's just too much to do. So I'd break it up into jobs. I'd say, you know what? First, I'm going to come in. I'm going to clean the kitchen. Then I'm going to go clean the bathroom. Then I'm going to clean the bedroom. Then I'm going to go and I'm going to clean the living room. So I took that one job and I turned it into 4 little mini jobs. Each one of those mini jobs would be a function. All right, so I've got a function right here that runs when the program starts. It's not a real long function. You can see all of it on the screen at one time. There's nothing special about the name Start the Game. I could have called it Ralph. It wouldn't have mattered. But what this function does is it does something very special. This function right here is known as a driver. Not like a person who drives a car, but this function drives the program. What do I mean? This function called start new game, first it calls this function, then 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 it calls this function. So the job of start new game is to call all the functions that are necessary for the program to be able to run. Now, probably all of you who are in this class are too young to maybe totally understand what I'm talking about, but I used to teach at a different school. We had a guy who was my boss named Larry. And Larry was a great guy. He still is a good friend of mine, even though I haven't seen him in a few years. But Larry was a supervisor. His job was not necessarily to do a lot of things, but to know who to task, who to tell to do something. If he knew there was something that had to be done that I could do well, he'd say, Jeff, go do this. All right. The reason I'm telling you this is I always wondered just exactly what does Larry do? Because he walked around a lot, he talked to people, and everybody liked him, but I wasn't really that sure what he did. So one week when I was there, he worked with me for about 5 years. And one week, we at the beginning of our semester, he was gone. And I said, where's Larry? And they said, oh, he went on a cruise. He's going to be gone for 2 weeks. While that 2 weeks went on, I found out what Larry did. Because there were certain things that he knew to delegate to people that weren't getting delegated to people. So there were certain things he said, Jeff, do this. Doug, do this. Mary, do this. Sally, do this. All right. But it wasn't being done. So Larry was a driver. Well, in the same way, start new game is a driver. The job of start new game is to call the different routines. And I broke this program up into 7 routines. The start new game and the other 6 routines that are called by start new game. So I want to spend a few minutes going over what each of these routines do. This might not make a whole lot of sense to you. All right. And I will tell you that tomorrow, when we start actually going in and writing a couple websites as a class, we're going to do very little of this stuff. But it's important that you understand what it is. All right. So you can at least say you've seen it. So the first routine that start new game calls is it's going to call a routine called initialize variables. What's that going to do? That's going to give a value to each one of these things. So it's going to give number input a value. It's going to give is NaN flag a value, is 0 flag a value, is odd flag a value, is even flag a value. So it's going to give each one of those 5 things a value. All right. And just so you're aware of it, this is going to hold a number. That's going to be the number that we're going to check to see if it's odd, even, etc. These 4 things are all flags. When they're flags, what it means is they're going to be true or they're not going to be true. So if we put in something that's non-numeric, is NaN flag, which means is not a number flag, will be true. If we put in 0, is 0 flag will be true. If we put in 37, is odd flag will be true. If we put in 44, is even flag will be true. Right now, those variables don't have any values. Their values are undefined. We want to give them values. So we're calling a routine. And you'll notice that when we call these routines, it has a set of parentheses in it. Sometimes you've got to provide information. So let's say with that house that I told you that I used to have, let's say that I brought over somebody to work on the house and they were going to do some cleaning. And I said to them, clean the room. And they looked at me like I was nuts and they said, what room? And I said, clean the room. I mean the bathroom. Then I could put bathroom in here. That's information that the routine needs to do its job. This routine doesn't need any extra information. So we leave these just open and close with nothing inside. But if I go down to the function called initialize variables, look what it does. It's real small. It gives all the flags are set to false. And they're all set to false because I haven't inputted a number yet. I could have come in here and said number input equals 0. I could have done that. It doesn't hurt or help to do that, but I could have done that. But if I did it like this, now all 5 of those variables that I declared up here, they're now being given an initial value. All right. When it hits this curly brace, it goes back up to here and it says, oh, done with initialized variables. Now call this routine called print start message. So it comes down and it says, wow, that's a little routine. And it's going to do one of those alert boxes that says you are starting a new game. So it does that alert box. It hits this. It comes back up again and it says, oh, now we want to call input a number. But the number we input, we want to put it into our variable. And there's a mistake in here. This should have said number input, not number, number input. Okay. What I'll do during lunch is I'm going to copy this one and I'm going to let you copy it like you did the stuff before. All right. But this is going to allow us to input a number. Guess what? You've already done something like that. You did something just like this earlier. So it'll say enter a whole number. All right. And we're setting number equal to that. And we don't even have to do that. We can just call input number. What I wanted to show you is you can do it two ways. So we're calling input number to input a number. Then we're going to call the function that's going to determine, did we put in nothing or something non-numeric, or did we put in 0, or did we put in a number? And if we put in a number, was that number odd or was that number even? So that's what this routine does. Okay, so we come down to here, and it's bigger than the other ones. And it says, this says in English, is what we put in there, was it non-numeric? So what we put in there for that number input, was it non-numeric? If it is, we set this flag called is NaN for is not a number. We set it to true. And we set it to true because it's true. It was not a number. And remember, if this one is true, we skip all these. And you go, well, you didn't set those other ones. Yes, we did. We set them up here. But originally, we set this flag to false. Now in here, if we put in something that's non-numeric, we set it equal to true. Well, let's imagine that we put in something, but we put in a 0. So that isn't correct. It's not, 0 is a number, but now this is true. So now we say, if the number we inputted was 0, now we want to take this flag called is 0 flag. We set it to true. The is NaN was set to false initially, and these were set to false initially. So again, the only one I've reset has been that one. All right, but let's assume that we put in there 37. Well, this is not true then, so we skip that. This is not true then, so we skip that. So this says, this kind of weird looking symbol, which is a % sign, says divide the number by 2 and check the remainder. If the remainder is 1, it's an odd number. So we set the flag called is odd flag to true, and we skip this. So we run it again and we put in 44. Well, we skip that, we skip that, we skip that. And then we come down to here. 44 divided by 2 has no remainder. So we set the is even flag to true. Then finally, we call print status, which is just going to print out. If this flag, this is a shortcut. I just wanted you to see this. This is the same thing here as saying if NaN flag equal true. No one ever types that because it's a lot less to type it in the other way. So if this flag is true, we give an alert that says the input was not numeric. If this flag was true, we say the input 0 is neither odd nor even. If this flag is true, we say the number like 37 was odd. And if this one is true, we say something like the number 44 was even. Then we go back up to here again. And we finally, the last routine that's in here, we call play another round or not. All right, so what does that do? That brings up one of those prompts that says, do you want to try again? And it's telling you here to answer yes or no, a Y or an N. But what happens if the person puts a little Y in there? Or even worse, what if they put in the word yes? Like, I want to play it again, Y-E-S. Well, if all I check for is a Y right now, and I put in Y-E-S, they don't want to play anymore. So what I do is I grab just the first character. And this is one of those things in computer terminology. Since it's working with computers, it starts with 0. So the 0th character is the first one. So if I put Y-E-S in there for my answer, it's going to just pluck out the Y. Then what if I put Y-E-S in lowercase? It's going to grab that character and it's going to make it uppercase and then check to see if it's a Y. And if it is, it's going to call our routine right here, our driver, and it's going to go through the whole thing all over again. All right. So I'm going to save this. And when I open it with live server, you are starting a new game. Let's just go through all of them. I'm going to put in nothing. And it comes back and it says the input was non-numeric. You want to play it again? I'll put in the word yes, all in lowercase. And it works. You're starting a new game. Now we'll put in literally, rather than leaving it blank, I'll put in hello. Again, the input was non-numeric. All right, do I want to play another game? Yes. Starting a new game, I'm going to put in a 0. And it says the input 0 was neither odd nor even. All right. Do I want to play the game again? Yes. So now I'm going to put in a number that's odd, 35. And it says the number 35 was odd. I run it one more time. And I want to play it again. Yes. And what number? 43. I did 35, 44. The number 44 was even. Do I want to play it again? No. And I'm done. All right. So what I just showed you, maybe it seemed like we ran through that quickly. It probably did. All right. But what I just showed you was a complete JavaScript program from start to finish. Now, it's not a big program. It really and truly isn't. It ends on line 108 and it starts on line 20. So it's about 70 or 80 lines, something like that, maybe a little more. But we come in here and we declare our variables. All right. So that's the variable declarations here. Then, as it says, this function will start a new game. This is our program driver. The job of this function, again, it's like a supervisor. Rather than doing the work, it delegates the authority of initializing variables to this routine, then of printing the start message to this routine, then of inputting a number to this routine, then of determining the status to this routine, then of printing the status to this routine, and to ask if we want to play it again or not to this routine. So again, it is a program driver. And the reason that I'm going through this, I'm not trying to waste my time. I'm not trying to waste your time. But we went over this, and what I want to show you quickly in here, give me a second, is I'll bring everything I want right back up in just a second. Where are we? There we go. Close a few of these. I've got a question for you right now. Do you see in here on my screen how it's blue and I've got the MPG easy up? Can you see that or not? Anybody?
No, it's frozen.
Well, let me change my screen share. Now, can you see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Now, why am I telling you this? I mean, why should you even care? Now, remember, this is from right here. So if I open it with live server, this is that thing where we can come in there and enter miles per gallon, etc., all that stuff. All right, we've looked at that before. That's not that big a thing. What is a big thing is now if I bring up mpgeasy.html, I'm sorry, the other one, mpgeasy.js, okay, that's even a shorter program than the one we just went over. So I'm going to go over what's in this one right now. I'm not trying to confuse you. I'm trying to help you. Now, in here, we've got something that they don't say let before it. It says the word const. And const means it's a constant. You can't change it once you've given it a value. So we are assuming in here that the smallest amount of miles somebody can drive is a mile, that the largest number of miles somebody can drive is 1,000, that the smallest number of gallons of gas they can use is 1, and the most gallons of gas they can use is 1,000. Okay, let's pretend for just a second that I was doing a program where I was asking you to type in a number of inches, and I told you how many feet that was equal to. Can somebody tell me how many inches are in a foot? Does anybody know?
12.
That's correct. There's 12 inches in a foot. So I could come in and do something like const inches in a foot and set it equal to 12. So constants are typically things that don't change. So when my program is running, I don't want you to be able to change the number of miles this is the minimum, this is the maximum, this is the minimum, this is the maximum. So we are going to force the user to enter a number for miles driven between this number and this number. We're going to force the user to enter a value for the gallons of gas they used between this number and this number. All right. Then whatever they enter for miles driven is going to go into here. Whatever they enter for gallons used is going to go over here. We're going to divide miles driven by gallons used, and that answer is going to go into MPG. All right. Hopefully that makes at least a little bit of sense to you. All right. So let's take a look at the program, because there's a few things we have not talked about yet. So we'll do it right now. All right. We got about 10 minutes, and then we're going to do our lunch break. Now, we did a parse int before. This is a parse float. We did a parse int before, and now we're doing a parse float. What's the difference? A parse int expects you to put in a whole number with no decimal. It throws any decimal you put in away. A parse float will take the decimal. So for my miles driven, if I enter 123.457, it'll keep the 457. If instead of putting this in, had I originally put in parse int, which would be wrong, and I put in 123.457, it would throw away the decimal place. I wanted to keep it. So instead of a parse int, I used a parse float right there. Then I'm checking. Now, if you can understand after I explain this, what this means, you're already starting to understand how to code. This says, while either I put in something non-numeric for miles driven, or the miles driven that I put in was less than 1, or the miles driven that I put in was greater than 1,000. So if any one of those three things happen, if either I put in a number, I put in a non-numeric value, and that's this, or I put in something that's out of range, meaning it's 0 or below, or I put in something that's out of range, meaning it's 1,001 or above. If any one of those three conditions is true, I give an alert that says non-numeric value or out of range, and I ask them to do it all over again. This line right here, notice how this line is blue, and so is the one up here, because they're the exact same line. So I ask you to input, then I validate your input. I make sure that the input you put in was between 1 and 1,000. If it is not between 1 and 1,000, I ask you to do it again. Then I come up and I check it again. If you still put something that was out of range in, I again give you an error and I tell you to do it again. So by the time I get out of this while loop right here, when I get down to here, I have put in a valid value for miles driven, meaning I put in something that's numeric and I put in something between 1 and 1,000. Then I do virtually the same thing I just did, but not with miles driven. I do it with gallons used. So I ask you to enter a number for gallons used that's between 1 and 100, and I give it a default value of 10. And again, I say, while whatever you put in is non-numeric, or, and that's the sign for or we put in 0 or below, or we put in more than 100. If that's the case, just like we did before, we're going to give you an alert that says your gallons used was non-numeric or out of range, and we're going to ask you to do it again. And again, this line is the same as this line is here. All right. So if we get down to this point down here, now the number that we put in for miles driven is valid. All right. And it's within range. And whatever we put in for gallons used is numeric and it's within range. So we can just do the simple math. And that's miles driven. So imagine I put 400 in there for miles driven, and it asks me if gallons used, and I put in 16. Then that's going to take the 400 divided by 16, which is 25, and it's going to assign that to MPG. All right. Then this is just doing the output. Now, I could go on and on about the stuff that's in here. I just want to tell you, this character that you see right there, that character is up near the top of your keyboard. It's right underneath the key in the upper left-hand corner, right underneath your escape key. And it's called a tick or a back tick. And what that allows us to do, I just want to show you this. If I didn't use this, I'm going to grab this line right here. Okay. And what I'm telling you is if I didn't do that, I'd have to write something like this. A double or a single quote, and I'd have to put the value for miles driven was, and I'd have to end this, plus, and then I have to say miles driven dot toFix 2, and then I'd have to end that in a plus like this. All right. So something along the lines of that. And why is it giving me an error here? Let's see. Invalid character. I don't know what it would want to BR or what, but see so when I use these tick characters here and here, it's called a template literal. You don't have to worry about memorizing that, but it lets you put the value of the variable right inside of your string. It's something fairly new in JavaScript, and it doesn't sound like much. That's why I'm getting that. All right, it doesn't sound like much, but it's something new, and it's something everybody wanted them to do. So if I run the program and I put in there for my miles driven 400, this line will say the input for miles driven was 400.00. This says put 2 decimal places on the end. This will also say the input for miles driven was 400.00. What I got in blue right there is more the old style way of doing this. What I've got here with these template literals is the new style way of doing it. It's the preferred way today. And you'll notice if you look in here also that I say plus equals. All right. That means take this, and when it sees the plus equals, it adds this onto the end of it. Then when it sees this plus equals, it adds it onto the end of that. And you'll notice at the end of each one of these lines, it says \n. That means new line. That's like you hit your enter key. So if I put in 400 for my miles driven, and I put in 16 for my gallons used, my output should be in an alert box. It should say the input for miles driven was 400.00. Then on the next line, the input for gallons used was 16.00. Then on the next line, the calculated miles per gallon was 16.00. Well, let me save it and let me run it. And again, it's a JS file. Remember, I can only run this from an HTML file, run live server. So I went back to my MPG Easy, right mouse clicked, and chose open with live server. Now I've got this, boom. How many miles did you drive? 400. How many gallons of gas did you use? 16. And there's my output. Exactly what I showed you before. All right. So again, and we're going to break in just a minute or two, but all I tried to do this morning was to quickly show you what's behind the language JavaScript. And really all of the stuff that I showed you this morning would apply to virtually any programming language. It might be done a little bit different in one language as opposed to another language, but it will all be done basically the same way. All right. So what are we going to do after lunch? I'm going to show you quickly what we're going to do. I've written a game for you, and this one is a game, and it's real simple. We're going to go back here to that stuff that I gave you this morning. So I'm going to open up again that day 3. Don't worry if you can't see it, you will in a minute. All right. So let's see. Let me change my share. All right. So we're going to come up and we'll start with one of these. I don't know which one, but we're going to run this and watch what happens when I run it. All right. Well, nothing happened. There it is. You're starting a new game. Tells you to guess a number between 1 and 100. I'll say 50. It says your guess was too low, and it says guess again. I'll say 75. My guess was still too low. Guess again. 87. It's still too low.
On your screen,
94. Don't worry if you can't see it, because we're going to play it as a class. It says it's still too low. 98. It says it's too high. 96. It's too low. 97. And it says, congratulations, you guessed the number in 7 guesses. So after lunch, I'm going to explain the stuff that's in here. We're going to look at this, 2 different versions of this, and then we're going to look at the other miles per gallon program. It's 11:51. I'll see you at 1 o'clock. If anybody has any questions or anything, just please put it in the chat. Okay? All right. I will see you then at 1 o'clock. All right, a couple things as we get started again, and there might be still some people who are filing in, which is fine. The version of that odds and evens that I put out there had a couple mistakes in it. It actually still worked, but it didn't work as well as it could. So I put a new version out there if you want that. And what I'll do is tomorrow, I'll put another thing out and give you another URL like I did today. It'll say day 4, and I'll have this file in there. Okay. All right. So as we get going, what I'm going to do between 1 and 2 is go over some of the rest of these programs. And then probably from 2 till about 2:45 or 2:50, we'll go and we'll review the stuff that's in that tutorial on JavaScript. Now, the plan is tomorrow for us to create a full website from scratch. All right. So as soon as you come in here at 9 o'clock, that's what we're going to do. I'm not sure yet what software we're going to use to do that, but it'll be something. All right. So the other thing, I should mention this to you. I know you've heard this part already, but you all know that, again, you can send me your pictures if you want to. And again, I'm not going to even say that anymore, but that's fine. But probably either, if you didn't get it already, then either tomorrow afternoon or Friday morning, you're going to get an email from Ms. Bragg, and she's Barbara Bragg. She's the woman who set up these courses. And it'll be an evaluation form where you can say how good was the class, how good was the instructor. I'm not going to tell you what to say, just be honest. If you thought the class was terrible, put that down. If you thought it was great, put that down. Whatever you think it was. But When you do get these evaluation forms, please fill them out and send them back to her, because Ranken gets a lot of funding for this. In other words, the government gives us a lot of money, so we're able to do some of this stuff. For instance, next year, if we go back to on campus, which is I think what we're going to do. In the past, they've always given free lunches to students. All right. And in order for that stuff to continue, all right, Ms. Bragg has got to go and give reporting data. So she has to let them know what worked and what didn't work in the classes, etc. She gets all that feedback back from these forms that you fill out. All right. And if you say, well, I really don't want to, then if nothing else, if you've got a parent that would be willing to fill it out, that's fine too. All right. All the instructions should be on there when you get it. Okay. All right. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go over, this is one that I totally wrote. All right. Is it a great program? Heck no, but it's fine. Create a simple guess the number type game. It should choose, so that the computer is going to choose a random number between 1 and 100. And then you're going to guess. If you guessed wrong and your guess was too low or your guess was too high, you'll tell you that. Okay. And the game ends once you guess correctly. And when you're done, it asks you if you want to play it again. So again, this is another example. When you look in here, I'm going to go down to the bottom. The whole body, the body starts right here. And it says this start new game like we had before. But when I look in here, the whole body is made up of JavaScript. That's all that's in the body. In the body, there is no HTML. It's all JavaScript. So I'm going to start going over this. All right. So, and I want to explain some of the stuff that I kind of mentioned before lunch, but we maybe didn't talk about in a lot of detail. So when the program starts, it calls this start new game. We'll get into that in a minute. These are our variables and our constants. When you create a constant, you must give it a value when you create it. You can't say, I'll give it one later. It doesn't work like that. So the minimum guess that we're going to allow someone to make is 1. The maximum guess we're going to allow someone to make is 100. All right. And actually that should make sense to everybody. All right. It really and truly should make sense to everybody. Now, I cut this back. It was a lot bigger than it was. So I was only going to give you 10 guesses and I was going to keep count. I don't think we need that variable anymore. So I'm just going to comment it out. But again, what I want people to understand is when you start playing the game, the computer will automatically generate a number between 1 and 100. If you make a guess and you guess a number less than 1, or you guess a number greater than 100, or you guess something that's non-numeric, it's not going to count that as a guess. So the only guesses that it's going to count are ones that you make between 1 and 100. Now, if you run the program and it says guess a number and you say 5 and it says no, it's higher, and you keep saying 5, it's going to keep saying no higher, 5, no higher, 5. I mean, we could check for that, but I didn't. All right. So again, these are constants. These values cannot change while the program is running. So again, the minimum number that will allow is 1. The maximum number will allow for a guess is 100. So when the program starts, you call start new game. That's right here. So what is it doing? It says, hey, you are starting a new game. It's keeping track of how many guesses you've made. Since you're starting a brand new game, we reset the number of guesses to 0. You haven't made any guesses yet because it's a brand new game. This variable right here, which is a Boolean variable, the game isn't over. We just started it. So we set that to false. All right. Then we generate a random number. Now this may or may not look a little confusing. And I'm just going to spend a minute or two explaining to you that anytime any computer programming language creates a random number, what it does is it creates a number greater than or equal to 0 and less than 1. So in other words, the smallest number that it will create will be 0.0, just 0. In fact, it's 0.0, nothing. And the largest that it will create will be something like 0.999999999999876, something like that. All right. So again, what I'm telling you is it's going to create a number between 0, greater than or equal to 0, but less than 1. So we take that number and we say math.floor, which means if it's less than 0, if the number that you create, all right, is less than 0.5, basically. All right. What we're saying right here is take this number. So if we created, let's say this number, 0.634123, it's going to take that number and it's going to multiply it by 100 and then drop whatever's left and then add 1 to it. So that's going to become number 64 when you do that. And again, if this was like 87654, etc., it's going to multiply that, so it'll be by 100 to make it 87, and then it's going to add 1 to it. The reason it adds 1 to it is if we had 0, 0 times 100 would be 0. We don't want 0 to be a random guess, so we always add 1. All right. This will guarantee that we get a number that's between 1 and 100, which is what we want. Okay. Now, the next thing that's there looks a little weird. This line right here. All right. This is another one of those shortcuts. This is like saying while game over equal false. Anytime you put something in a parentheses like this, if it's a loop, like a while loop like we looked at earlier, or it's a loop like a for loop we looked at earlier, or it's a loop like a do while loop we looked at earlier, or it's one of those if statements that we looked at, what goes in the parentheses, that thing that you see in blue there, is known as a Boolean condition. It's something that's true or false. The computer doesn't understand kind of, sort of. So for example, if I've got a variable that I call game over, it's either true that the game is over or it's false. The game is not over. All right. And if you remember earlier, I had some flags because oftentimes you put flag on the name of a Boolean variable. I could have called this game over flag. All right. But I set those to true and false. So when you're making a decision like this in here, it's always a Boolean variable. So it's always going to be true or false. So we set it to false right here. So it is false. So while it's false, call play game. So that's what we're doing right here. We're calling play game. So we ask the user to input a number that's between 1 and 100. You saw this thing before. It's parse int because it's a whole number we want to put in there. And we're expecting them to put in a number between 1 and 100. However, if they put in something that's not numeric, or they put in a guess that's less than 1, or they put in a guess that's greater than 100, we don't want to count it. Instead, we just want to give them an alert that says, hey, your input was either non-numeric or it was out of range. Try doing it again. And again, this line right here, as you can see, is exactly the same as the line above. So this keeps them, this code right here, keeps them in the loop until they have put in a number between 1 and 100. If they put in a number that is out of range, it'll go into the body of that loop and it'll give them an alert. If they put in something non-numeric, meaning they put in a word or they leave it blank, it's again going to go in there and do that. And both times it'll ask them to do it again. So when you get to here, When the computer gets to line 55 that you see right there, I know that I have put in a number that's between 1 and 100. Because if I didn't, I'd be stuck in that loop that's in lines 50, 51, 52, and 53. All right. So since I know they put in a valid guess, I add 1 to my number of guesses. Remember, this line right here could be written in a bunch of ways. I could say plus plus num guesses, or I could say num guesses plus plus, or I could say num guesses plus equal 1, or I could say num guesses equal num guesses plus 1. So most of the time when you do something in a programming language, there are multiple ways of doing the same thing. But all 4 of those ways I showed you, this one, this one, this one, and this one, will all add 1 to the number of guesses variable. All right. Oh, I guess I did make this. I did only give you 10 guesses. So I'll take that variable and I'll uncomment that constant. This is going to count how many guesses you have. And if the number of guesses you made were greater than 10, it'll say you lose. So you get 10 turns. All right. And I'll show you this. It's not a big thing, but I want to show you something that you may or may not know. All right. So let me do a new share. I'm just going to put it on the screen. And I'm going to come in here and go to here and here. I'm going to just put in here 61. Can you all see? I'm asking the question. Can you all see the number 61 on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. You can always win the game, no matter what number they put in between 1 and 100 in just a few guesses. If you don't already know this, you always guess 50 first. If you guess 50, and here the number is 61, right? I'm pretending that's the number that the computer picked. So I say 50, and it comes back and it says higher. Now, in one guess, I've eliminated everything between 1 and 50. So 50 numbers have now been eliminated. So it tells me to guess again. And I say, okay, what's right between 50 and 100? 75. And it comes back and it says lower. So now I know in 2 guesses, I've eliminated all of the numbers between 1 and 50, and I've eliminated all the numbers between 75 and 100. So all that's left, I know the number has to be between 51 and 74. So again, I've already eliminated 50, and right there, that's 76 numbers have been eliminated already in 2 guesses. So I take half of what's left. 74 plus 51 is 125. So half of that is about 63. So I guess 63. And it says lower. So now I know I've eliminated 1 to 50, and I've eliminated 63 to 100. So what's left? Well, it's got to be between 51 and 62. And that's in 3 guesses. All right. So again, I take about half of it, and I'll say, like, I don't know, 57. And it'll say higher. So now I know that it's got to be between what? 58 and 62. I've made 4 or 5 guesses. So I take half of that and I say 60. And it says higher. So now I know what's left here. Well, what's left is 60 and 61. Doesn't matter which one I guess. In fact, I said 60 already here. So it's got to be 61 or 62. So if I guess 62, it says lower, and I guess 61. So the point is, in 5 or 6 guesses, if I keep taking my guess and eliminating a bunch of numbers, I can always win the game. Now, you may or may not have known that, you may or may not care, but I will tell you that when my kids were little and we'd go on trips and they'd start getting bored, I'd say, okay, it's time for guess the number game. And I'd give them a really big number. I'd say a number between 1 and 1,000. And sometimes they'd spend an hour. Because I showed them this program that I'm showing you right here, maybe a few months ago, and they were like, wow, you never even told us that. I said, yeah, because the game would have taken a lot less time. All right. But you can always win, is what I'm telling you. Even, if you've got 10 guesses, unless you don't want to win, you can always win. All right. So if you've made more than 10 guesses, that's you've already made 10 and you didn't get it, now you lose. Notice here, that means return. That means get out of here. Get out of this routine. If you get down to here, you haven't made 10 guesses yet. So one of 3 things has got to happen. Either you guess the right number, and there's what? When you first start, there's a 1 out of 100 chance you guess the right number. There's probably like a 49 out of 100 chance you guess too low, and a 49 out of 100 chance you guess too high. The reason I'm telling you that, you shouldn't make this check first. This check should be last because it only is true when you actually guess the right number. You should always either do guess for less or guess for greater. Always do that because the chances are much better. And if I put this one first, I could move this one over there and make that an if and make this one an else if, but then I have to make this check every single time. And it's a waste of computer processing time for it to guess it when it's going to be wrong most of the time. All right. And really, that's the entire program. There's not a lot of thought that went into this. So again, you've already seen it. So I just to prove that all of it works. So starting a new game. So it says, please make a guess. Now I'm going to lose on purpose. 50. It's too high. 50. That's 2 guesses, 3 guesses, 4 guesses, 5 guesses, 6 guesses, 7 guesses, 8 guesses, 9 guesses, 10 guesses, 11. Maximum number reached, you lose. So I know that works. That's good. I should always check to make sure that's the case. Now we're starting a new game. Okay, let's put in nothing. And we get non-numeric or out of range. Okay, good. So there should be no guesses so far. Now let's put in, again, non-numeric. Let's put in something out of range. Again, we get the message. Something else out of range. So I've tried 4 times, but I shouldn't have any guesses yet. My guesses should still be at 0 because everything I put in was not considered to be a valid guess. Now I will guess valid. 50. It's too low. So again, I'll cut it in half. 75. It's too high. So what's between 50 and 75? About 62. Too high. So I know the number's got to be between 51 and 61. 55. Too low. All right, 57. Too low. So it's got to be probably 58, 59, or 60. Congratulations, you got it in 6 guesses. That did not include those 4 guesses that I made at the beginning. All right, it did not include those 4 guesses that I made at the beginning where I put in nothing and I put in DDDD or something like that, and I put in 0 and I put in 100 and 1. All right, it didn't count any of those. And you'll notice again, guess the number 50, it says it's too low. If I say 49 or at 49, it still says it's too low. That's good. If I say 55, it's still too low. So I've made 3 guesses. They're all too low. All right. I'm not trying to win this game at fast on purpose. That's still too low. That's too high. So I know it's between 79 and 87. All right. It's between 79 and 83, I think we had. I don't know. 81. Too high. Too high. You got it in 9 guesses. So even screwing up at the beginning, if I kept doing that, where I'm cutting my total in half, like I am, all right, you can win the game. Now, again, that's not anything where you're going to go, oh, wow, that is so fantastic. It's not. But I just wanted to show that to you and show you, again, how that works. All right. Now, I want to show you another version of this. This is, for lack of better words, kind of a more souped up version. What do I mean? Well, watch. So I've got this, enter a guess, 50. Says it was wrong. It shows me my guess, and it says it was too low. So I guess again, 75. Says it was still too low. And it shows me my guesses as I'm going, 88. Still too low, 96. Now I'm too high. So I can tell by looking at this just right here, it's got to be between these two. So let's try 92. Still too high. Still too high. And I got it. All right. What I want you to understand with this is when we start to run this game like this, notice there's nothing down here. All right. And what I should have done and didn't do, but this button that's right here, this submit a guess, I should have disabled it until we put something in here. So again, I'll put in 50 and notice what happens then. It's from now on until I win the game or I get 10 guesses, it's going to show me every guess I made here. And if it's wrong, it's showing some color here with red. And it's also giving a message that it was too low. Now notice if I put in here, hello, and I submit a guess, it just took it as NaN, but it did take it as a guess. I did put in something non-numeric, just like if I put in this. All right. Now it's considered that to be 0. All right. So if I do come in here now and put in 1,000, of course it's going to say guess was too high, but it did count it as a guess. We could make some changes to this program so it worked just like the other program if we indeed wanted that to happen. All right. But what I wanted you to get across here is this is the kind of thing that you probably would put if on a website I was going to have games, I'd want it to be like this. It's more interactive. The thing I showed you before that just had those prompts and alerts, that's hard to play. If somebody is going to put something out on a website and you want them to use it, you'll want to make sure that whatever it is, it's something that's intuitive. In other words, they should be able to look at it and kind of figure out what they're supposed to do. This game right here is much more intuitive. All right. So let me try this here. 66, too high, 55, too low, 60, too low, 63, too low, must be 64. Nope. 65 then. Notice now when I put in the right answer, changes to green, and I get a button down here that wasn't there before. The way that my game was set up, it just kept starting a new game every time you won or you reached 10. Here it's up to you. If I want a new game, I have to press the button, and then all that stuff goes away. So this example that's right here is a little bit more, I don't know if reminiscent is the right word, but it's a little bit more the way you would want to set up a game if you were going to put it on a website. All right. So I'm going to right mouse click on here and choose view page source. Okay. Can you see my code up here? I'm asking the question. Can you see code?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the code. you'll notice that I left all the styling right inside of this file. All right. To say that the body is 50% only means only take up half the screen, up to a maximum of 800 and with a minimum of 480 pixels. This says to center it on the screen. Notice the font family we've got, a real simple sans serif. All right. Then we've got this last result. This is the last guess that you made. All right. It's going to be in white and it's going to be padded. So it'll be spaced out a little bit. So not a very long program, to be honest with you. Here's an H1 tag, number guessing game. You've already seen that. Here's the paragraph. I'm going to just, when I'm doing this, I can't hit enter. I can't move this. But we selected the number. See if you can guess it in 10 terms or less, 10 guesses or less. So we have a class of form right here that's real simple. It's got a label in it that says enter a guess. It's got a text box in it that's called guest field. And it's got a button in it that's called submit guess. That's its value. That's all that's really in here originally. Okay. Then, and this, sometimes people find this stuff confusing. Right here, those are empty paragraphs. That's a div that's got 3 empty paragraphs in it. One that's going to show the number of guesses, one that's going to show the last guesses you've made, and one that's going to show if the current guess was too high or too low. But when the program runs, there's nothing in there. How do I know there's nothing in there? Because all the content would go in between the paragraph tags, and there's nothing there, there's nothing there, and there's nothing there. This is an interactive game, and what that means by saying that it's an interactive game, it means based on what the user says, it's going to fill in the values that go into these things. All right. That's the way you want to try to write your JavaScript. I showed you JavaScript in the earlier examples, and I had you write programs, but they really weren't web programs. I wanted to show you programming principles. All right. Now, the stuff that's in here probably going to confuse the heck out of you, and it's okay. All right. What this does is it says, okay, in the document I'm currently in, I want you to look and I want you to find a class named guesses. Then I want you to go and look and I want you to find a class named last result and find a class named low or high. Once you find that information, copy it into here and into here and into here, etc. Just keep doing that. All right. Then we've got a thing that's called check guess. Well, guess what? You already know check guess, and you know how this is used. It's going to say whether or not your guess was correct, too high, too low, etc. Now this says let user guess equal number. That's a little confusing. Number is like trying to use parse int. So it's attempting to take whatever we put into that text box that's called guess field. It's attempting to grab its value and convert it into a number. Either it will be a number or it'll hold NaN if we left it blank or put something non-numeric in. All right. So here it says if guess count equal 1. So once we make a guess, this thing that says previous guesses will show on the screen and it'll show all the guesses we've made. And then every time we make a new guess, we'll add to it. We'll put the new guess they just made and then a blank space. Not that different from what I showed you before in that loop where we printed out the numbers that were between 1 and 25. All right. So they didn't do it the way that I did it, but it's totally fine. If you guessed the random number, I would have put this last. They put it first. All right. So if you guessed it, congratulations, you got it right. It turns that back color for that thing green. And now it's getting ready to see if you want to play another game. That's what this does. Otherwise, you didn't guess it. So is your guess count at 10? So is the guess you just made the 10th guess? Because remember, you only get 10. And was that guess you just made the 10th guess? If it was, and it was wrong, now you've reached your maximum. So you say, game over. All right. And again, you could ask them then if they want to play another game. Otherwise, if we get into here, they've made a valid guess and it's not the right number. So it's wrong. So we set the background to red and we put in the word wrong, but we have to check to see if it was too low or too high. If the guess they made was less than the random number, we say last guess was too low. Otherwise, if it was greater than the random number, we say the guess was too high. And then we add 1 to the number of guesses we have. This clears out whatever was in our text box. This puts the mouse cursor inside of that text box so we can make another guess. And like I said, it's a little bit confusing. All right. But this thing right here, this is a function that's called check guess. It starts there and it ends here. All right. This says, whenever you click the submit button, so when you click the button called guess submit, call the routine called check guess, which is that routine. So every time you guess, it's going to call that. That's what it's telling it to do here. When the game is over, you disable all this stuff. They shouldn't be able to type anything else in. But you want to reset the game. So all that stuff that had their guesses in it, too high, too low, you want all that removed. So you call reset game. So either at the end of set game over or when they click the reset button, you call reset game. And that says, oh, it's a new game, set my number of guesses to 1. All right. And basically, this is just going in there and setting up the board for you. That's what this is doing too. Now, I don't expect that to totally make sense. You know, my wife asked me during lunch, she said, how's it going? And I said, I think it's okay. But I said, this is the driest day when you try to explain programming to people. All right. And I can tell you that I've given, probably done these kinds of lectures hundreds of times in 30 years of teaching. All right. And the first time most people hear this, I can't see your faces, but the first time most people hear this, they've got the deer in the headlights look. In other words, they're like, I want to be anywhere but here. And I get it. I do understand. All right. I will tell you, we have 2 different programs at the Ranken location in Wentzville. One of them is the one I teach in, where you learn to make websites and you learn to program. The other one is where students learn to put computers together, take them apart, hook them up to one another, etc. That program's a lot more popular. And I've talked to some of the people in it, and I said, why did you go into that program and not in the one I'm teaching? Like, it's too hard. I can put computers together. I'm a little bit, good that way as far as putting stuff together, but writing programs is just too hard. All right. You can have your own feelings on that. All right. So a couple more things I want to talk to you about before we take our break in about 15 minutes. All right. First thing I want to mention is in here. You've already seen this, but hopefully you can see this. It's at the bottom of the page, and I'm going to make it bigger right there. It's got the current time. How did we do that where we've got the current time? That's JavaScript. So finding out the current time, to do that, that literally is or was JavaScript. And can you see code on your screen right now? Do you see function time in blue?
Yes.
Okay.
And actually, I got kicked out of the meeting for about a minute or two. So are we still talking about the game?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we just finished talking about the game.
Okay.
And now what I did was I went back to the You Can Call Me Mo site. You don't have to go back there, but I want to show people the clock that's in here. It's an active clock. It's ticking every second. So that's what we're talking about right now. Okay. And this is the code to do it. There's not much code. Everything is on the screen right here. Everything. All right. This says use strict. The span is where we put the time. All right. And we create what's called a new date object. And a date holds more than what's shown here. The only thing we care about are the current number of hours, the current number of minutes, and the current number of seconds. But date also gives you the month, the day, and the year. We could have added that stuff as well. I didn't want to. But there is a get day, a get month, and a get year. So we could have used those as well. Okay. What I wanted to make sure, in fact, if you look up on the screen right now, right, where are we? Come on. Where is it? Come on. If we run this, so let me go back right here. And you look at the time, you'll notice it says 01:38:30, well, whatever, PM. By default, you get military time. What does military time mean? If you don't know, 1 o'clock AM is 0100, 1 o'clock PM is 1300. The reason I'm telling you that is what I said was if the number of hours is greater than 12, subtract it. So if it was 8 o'clock at night, it would be 2000 hours. And once you remove 12 from there, it's back at 800 again. All right. So if the hours was greater than 12, and it really should have probably been greater than or equal to 12, but it's fine. All right. Then it's going to say, it's going to subtract 12 from it and it'll be a PM. Otherwise, it'll end with AM. And what this does, a little bit confusing, but I just want to make sure you see it. What that does right there is it says, okay, if the number that we just got for hours, if that number is less than 10, put a 0 before it. So if it's 3 o'clock, instead of putting 3, we put 03. And we do the same thing for minutes, and we do the same thing for seconds. So for instance, if this program would be running and it would be midnight, instead of saying 0:0:0:0, it'll say 00:00:00. So in other words, that number, there will always be 2 digits for the hour, 2 digits for the minute, and 2 digits for the second. And then finally, the last thing that's in here, this is called a set interval. Okay. So what it's saying is every 1 second, figure out the time for me. So that says to call this routine and do all this stuff every second. And the computer works fast enough that it can keep a pretty good running clock. Now, did we have to do this? No. All right. I think it's kind of nice to put a time in there, but you sure didn't have to. There was nothing at all that said we had to. All right. But I put it in there, for lack of better words, as kind of a nicety. All right. Now, the other thing I want to show you before we go on a break is in here. You saw this already. So a couple things. You should already know this, that if I take my mouse and put it over any of these 3 buttons, see how it changes? Can you see my screen with the buttons on it here? Do you see this? Anybody?
Yeah.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to come in here and change it there. Now, do you see where it says MPG program, simple vanilla JS?
Yes.
Okay. So this is just some CSS that says when you hover over the button, instead of having it be a white button with pink writing, make it a pink button with white writing. And when you're not hovering over it anymore, make it go back to the way it was. All right, that's no biggie. This is a text box where we're putting in the number of miles we drove. This is a text box where we're putting in the number of gallons we used. Notice I can't click in this one. I'm trying to click in the one that says miles per gallon. That text box has been disabled. Also, again, if I come in here and leave this blank, this field changes from an asterisk to non-numeric entry. If I put in a number that's greater than 1,000 or less than 1, instead of saying invalid non-numeric entry, it says invalid out of range entry. So this, once I put in a number between 1 and 1,000, this will go away. But now since this one's empty, it does the same thing. So it says non-numeric. If I put in something greater than 100, it now says out of range. If I put in something non-numeric, it says non-numeric. And if I put in something less than 1, it says out of range. So once I put in a number and click it, now all of those errors that are there, they go away. So there's nothing there whatsoever. And I've got my answer. As soon as I press reset, 5 things should happen. 6 things. This should clear. This should clear. This should clear. I should get my asterisk back there and back here. And my cursor, my mouse, should go right there. So let's see if it happens. My cursor right now is right there. So press reset. And it tells me the current screen dimensions. We'll get into that in just a bit. But notice what happened. All 5 of those things happened. It cleared this, it cleared this, it cleared this. That's 3 things. I guess 6 things happened. It added this, and I put my cursor there. That's what we want to have happen. These buttons do nothing on their own. I've got to program them to do something. In just the same way, this was a simple alert that when you click it, it added all of that information. So I want to take just about 5 minutes and look at this code, and then we'll take our afternoon break. All right. So the code is right here. A little less. There you go. Can you all see the code up on the screen right now? Can I hear a yes? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So again, as I mentioned to you early this morning, that use strict means it's telling JavaScript that if it doesn't know how to do something, if the user didn't complete something that she or he should have, don't complete it for them like it would normally. These are our constants. Again, minimum miles driven, maximum miles driven, minimum gallons used, maximum gallons used. Then this INNE and OORE, those are constant strings. These 4 right here, these are constant numerical values. They're numbers. These are constant string values. I wanted to be sure that if I put something non-numeric in, it always said the same thing. And if I put something out of range in, it always said the same thing. That's how I could make sure this happens. All right. Now I'm going to say something. You won't probably get this. It's totally fine. This right here, to people who are just learning to program, is probably, believe it or not, the most confusing part of the program. All right. And what this does is it says, hey, anytime I would normally use this, I'm creating what's called an alias. I don't want to type all that in. This is saying, let me just type in this. And when I type in a $, it means this right here. And it's a lot nicer because, as you can see, it's a lot less typing. All right. Then we initialize our variables. Guess what? You already know what this is. You've done this kind of thing or looked at it on programs before where we've initialized variables. All right. Now, JavaScript is a different language in that it lets you do some things that other programming languages don't allow you to do. I want to say that again. JavaScript is a different type of programming language in that it allows you to do some things other languages don't let you do. During my life as a programmer, I probably have learned, I don't know, somewhere between 10 and 20 programming languages. Today, there's about 5 or 6 that I use often. But one thing JavaScript lets you do is make one of these functions like we did before. But when you get done with a function, you can take the results of the function and assign it to a variable. And that may mean nothing to you, but I'm just telling you that most other programming languages don't let you do what is being shown here. So we're asking the user. This says whatever they put into that text box for the miles driven, put it in a miles driven variable. Whatever they put in the text box for gallons used, put it in a gallons used variable. Then let's assume that everything is cool, everything's valid. So if it is, and as it shows right here, again, this is a shortcut for this, call input miles driven. This is going to check to make sure that the number that we put in there was between 1 and 1,000. So first it comes in and it says, if what we put in there was not a number, take that thing that currently has the red asterisk in it and put in there this message right here that we defined up here. Invalid, non-numeric entry. All right, otherwise, if we put in a number that's less than 1, or we put in a number that's greater than 1,000, then we want to remove that asterisk and put in there out of range error. All right, and in both of these, we've got this thing called retval that's either going to be false or it's going to be true. And what retval will do will tell us whether or not we want to keep going with the program. So if we go here, it's an error. So we're going to set retval to false. If we get to here, and that is true, so to speak, then it's going to be an error, and we're going to set retval to false. If we get down here to this last else, that means we put in a number between 1 and 1,000. So accept it. So we don't want anything where that asterisk is, remove it, and set our return value to true. Then we do virtually the same thing for gallons used, except instead of checking for miles driven, we're checking for gallons used. Then if everything is cool for both, that's all we have to do for the calculation. Miles per gallon, MPG, equals miles driven divided by gallons used. Then we set that box, that text box, the one I told you that we couldn't change. All right. We set it equal, the value of it equal to the miles per gallon that we just figured out. When we click the reset button, do all of this good stuff. Take everything that we had, those 3 text boxes, and blank them out. That's what this does. Take the 2 things on the side that have those red asterisks and put the asterisks back. All right. Then for miles driven, put the focus there. So put the computer there. Then this get resolution, that's down here. All I wanted to show was I can ask JavaScript to go out for me and tell me what the current size of my screen is. And again, you might think, who cares? But it can be something that's very important. All right, now watch, if you would please, because we're going to break right now, but I'm going to click on, where are we? I'm going to click help. And when I get done, it says, where is it? Come on. Value, click the help button. Oh, okay. Is it reset? Try it again. Yeah, your current screen resolution size is 1920 by 1080. Who cares? Well, I'm going to make my screen smaller. See how it's smaller now? All right. Now when I click it, it says it's, well, it's not working. It should have said 920 by 1080. All right. So the point is, it should always be giving me my screen dimensions. Now I'm already over. So it's already 102. I'm sorry, 152. Let's come back, please, at 202, and we'll finish it up for today. All right, I'm going to kind of wrap it up for the day. So we're a little bit ahead. So I'm going to go over the material that's in this JavaScript tutorial between now and 3. What we are going to do tomorrow is tonight I'm going to create a website. I'm not sure what package I'm going to use yet, but I'm probably going to use 2 different packages, and then we will create them together tomorrow as a class. I'll give you the finished project, the finished product, but I'm going to ask that you create them with me. All right. And then on Friday, you know, I'd asked you to come up with something you want to make a website about. You can pick whatever one you want and make a website. We'll talk more about that tomorrow and on Friday. All right. So as they mentioned here, as we get into it, yeah, I'd agree with both these. JavaScript is the world's most popular programming language, and it's the language of the web. Now, you may look at this and laugh and say, no, it's not easy to learn, or you might say that it is. I don't know. We did not go over a lot of the stuff that's in here. There just is not enough time, of course, in one period. So I want to hit a few of the things that are in here. All right. Now, there's different ways that you can write information out. The only ones that we looked at the alert, and we looked at logging stuff out to the console. But there's other ways that you can provide output in JavaScript. All right. The inner HTML, especially that one, it really allows you to go in. So when you look in here, this is kind of a silly example. All right. But what they're doing is this ID of demo right here. Okay. What they're saying is what we want to write into there is 5 plus 6. And that's why you get the 11. Now I can come in here and I can put anything in the world I want. So again, I can come in here. This is a sample paragraph. And when I run it, that's exactly what you get. So what I'm telling you is quite often when you are using JavaScript, if you want to be able to write to a web page, you either create a div, or they've done here, they did a paragraph, but a lot of times you'll see it also done as a div like that. You'll give it an ID, and then you can write whatever you want to write to it. So this is a sample div. And you can see how it changed. But that's an important concept. And you might say, well, you know, then why didn't we spend more time on it? Most of the programs that I had written were way too long. You know, we could probably have spent, you know, the whole day on just one program. And I didn't know if that would be a good thing or a bad thing for you. All right. Now, one thing about JavaScript, I just want you to know this. Everything that's in here is called a statement. So there's 4 statements right there that are in blue. Now, where I told you before that JavaScript is very forgiving, if we left off the semicolon here and here and here and here, it would have still worked just fine. Because Java puts in what are called implied semicolons when you don't put them in. It is the only language that I use on a regular basis that does something like that. It says, oh, you probably meant to put a semicolon there, but you didn't, so I'll put one in for you. You don't see it in there, but it puts one in there. All right. JavaScript is very loose on its syntax, just so you know. This, just pretend this doesn't even exist. Var, the word var, is how you used to create variables in JavaScript up until about 6 or 7 years ago. But it's considered a poor way of doing it because it leads to really bad programming habits. Let is the way you should always create variables today. All right. I mentioned comments to you. That's a single line comment. But there's a multi-line comment, just like we saw in CSS. All right. Again, variables. I'm not going to go over the var part. I've already talked to you about using let, and I've talked to you about using const. It says this chapter uses var. That's just a very poor habit to get into. All right. Let is better because, as it says, you're not going to be able to fall into any of these bad patterns in JavaScript when you use let and you use that using strict that I mentioned. It's going to make you a better programmer from the beginning. The book that we use in the classroom for JavaScript, I always tell the students, if it says var in there, just pretend it was not there and it says let. And they've already been told, if when they're creating their own programs, if they use the word var, they get points taken off because it's the wrong way of doing things. All right. Const we've talked about. Constants are constants. They can't be reassigned. So if we did this, we made a constant called pi that's equal to this, and then we tried to reset it, we'll get an error. And they even show you this. If you run it, it's not going to work. And if you go in and you take a look inside of, if you inspect and you go into the console, you're going to find in there sooner or later, it's going to give you that error. Your operators, you probably already knew these. Plus for addition, minus for subtraction, asterisk for multiplication, and a forward slash that goes from right to left for division. You can use exponentiation. So in other words, if I write something like this, I'm hoping you can see this on the screen. If I write let x equal 7 asterisk asterisk 3, that's the same thing as saying let x equal 7 times 7 times 7. They mean the same thing. Now, up until about 6 years ago, you couldn't use this. This operator was not available. Instead, you wrote math.pow, and then the number you want to raise, 7, and how many places you want to raise it to, 3. You used to have to write it like that. There's actually very few languages that allow you to do it this way. Most languages only have you do it like this. So JavaScript supports both. All right. The arithmetic is what you'd expect. We talked about the plus plus and the minus minus, but that will only add 1 or subtract 1 from a number. All right. Assignment. There are a bunch of these operators. I have never used any of these right here, but I use these all the time. You already saw this one, the plus equals. There's also a minus equals. There's a times equals. There's a divide equals, and there's a modulo or remainder equals. All right. Data types. JavaScript has very few data types. It's got about 5. For simple variables, there's about 5 of them. And weird things can happen. All right. What is it? What do I mean? Well, what happens here when you add 16 and you add the word Volvo to the number 16? What do you get? It glues the two of them together and it gives you 16 Volvo. It's kind of weird. But it takes this and it makes it a string, and then it adds the other part onto it as another string. How about if you do it the other way? Volvo plus 16 does the same thing. All right. Functions we talked quite a bit about today. You saw some functions. You saw how to create a function. Now in this function, it expects that you're going to pass two values in, probably, I guess, numbers, because you're going to multiply one number by the other number. When you name this stuff, so this name right here, my function, that's called an identifier. You can name it anything you want. My function's kind of a dumb name, but you get the idea. And when you look at this, here's the function right there. Here they're calling the function 4, 3. So that should return 12, which is 4 times 3. If I put in here 57 and I put in here 18, it'll be something like 1026. All right. So this 57 becomes P1. This 18 becomes P2. So this is the same thing as saying this times this. So you might say, well, big deal. I mean, who cares then? Why even do this? Well, what if I called it 4 times? And the first time I put in here 12 times 12. Then the next time I put in here 11 times 11. Then I did it again and I put in 10 times 10. Then I did it again and I put in 9 times 9. And I ran it. All right, well, I'm only getting the last one, so I guess I've got to add them to them. Let's see. So let's try a plus equals here. And now I get all of them. 12 times 12 is 144. 11 times 11 is 121. 10 times 10 is 100. And 9 times 9 is 81. Now I have to add to this. All right, so I'd have to say like plus, and then put in a blank space or something like that. I think if I did that, it would pretty this up quite a bit. There. Now you can see each one. Okay. Now, one thing we didn't get into at all are objects. That's a special kind of variable. So I could make a variable called car, and I could give it what are called properties. So I could give it a name, I could give it a model, I could give it a weight, I could give it a color, and there's all sorts of other stuff. Think about it if I made this a person. I could give the person a first name, a middle name, a last name. I could give the person an eye color, a hair color, a height, and a weight. All right, here's the things a car can do. Car can start, a car can drive, a car can brake, and a car can stop. Just like if I made a person, I could say person.eat, person.sleep, person.drink, etc. JavaScript has some built-in objects, but you typically create your own. And you create them as in what are known as name value or key value pairs. So type is equal to fiat, model is equal to 500, color is equal to white, etc. All right. JavaScript is what's called an event-driven programming language, which means it sits there all day long and it waits for things to happen so that it can react to those things that happen. Things like what? Like you clicking a button. So let's look at this example. All right, when it says the time is, when this says, when you click that button, what I want you to do is in this empty paragraph here, I want you to fill it up with HTML by calling the date. And notice what I get. That's a full date object. If you remember before, what I showed you on our footer, we only grabbed this part of it. All right. We did not grab the day. We did not grab the month. We did not grab, or the day of the week. We didn't grab the month. We didn't grab the day, and we didn't grab the year, but we could have. Strings we've talked about. JavaScript has so many. Now I lost that. Where was that? JavaScript has so many string methods. All right. When you start going through them, there's some, there's more here, there's more here. There's probably a good 20 or 30 methods, because a lot of the times what you want to do is you want to be able to manipulate the text that's on a web page. One way you can do that is with those string methods. All right. JavaScript treats every number as a number. It doesn't matter if it has a decimal place or not. I'm not talking parse int or parse float. To Java, numbers are numbers. It doesn't matter whether they have a decimal or no decimal. There are number methods just like there are string methods. You can convert a number to a string. You can convert a string to a number. All right. There's arrays. Okay, so here's an example of an array. There's one variable called cars that holds 3 values. So doing this is the same thing as if you had done this, but doing it, what you see in blue there, that made 3 different variables. This is one variable that holds 3 different things. The example that I typically give students for this is I mentioned that when I first moved to Missouri about 5, now closer to 6 years ago, that I lived in an apartment. So if I call this apartments, and I said that in apartment 1, Scott lived, in apartment 2, Brown lived, and in apartment 3, Green lived, etc., that would be one thing called apartments, but it would have 3 different values in it because there'd be 3 different apartments. All right. So that's what an array is. It's a special variable that allows you to hold more than one value at a time in it. And there's a lot of things that you can do with arrays rather. Dates we've talked about, Booleans we've talked about. I even talked with you already about random and the random number. All right. There's the for loop. We went over the for loop. There's a special kind that you use with arrays called for in, and another one you use with arrays called for of. But we looked at the for loop. We looked at the while loop. We looked at the do while, which isn't even listed here, but sometimes you want to use it. When you've got break, you saw the break. We looked at that before. The break we used to get us out of that switch statement that we had when we had the small, medium, or large. But break gets you out of whatever you're in. Right there, it just stops. So here we've got if I equal 3, break. So in other words, this right here should say the number is 0, the number is 1, the number is 2. When it gets to 3, it breaks out. So you see what it says. Just the number is 0, the number is 1, and the number is 2. Okay. You can have type of, and type of shows you the type of variable you're working with. Some of this stuff is just really, really much more advanced. That's why I'm not spending the time going over it, okay? JavaScript has about 60 or so reserved words. They are right here. So what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. It looks like about 80 reserved words. So they can only be used in a certain way. And if you try to use them in a different way, you get an error message. It's not legal to do that. All right. There's the history of JavaScript. That's not that important. More object stuff, more function stuff. This is all much, much, much more complex stuff. If you remember yesterday, we talked for a while about the box model. And I mentioned to you that if you understood the box model, that you could write anything anywhere on a web page. Anytime you put anything on a web page, it becomes part of what's called the document object model, or the DOM. And we spend a good week or two in our web design class going over the DOM so people understand how to use it. And fortunately or unfortunately, not only is there the DOM, there's the BOM. And where the DOM is the document object model, the BOM works with the browser. It's the browser object model. Okay. All right. There's a lot of examples in here as well. Okay. Now, we're just about finished. I'm going to probably let you go early today because I didn't really have anything else prepared. All right. But what I would like you to do, again, if you want to send me your pictures, send me your pictures. You've already heard that. If as soon as you get the evaluation form from Ms. Barbara Bragg from Ranken, please fill that out and send it back in. I told you why. The plan right now, I think I've said this before, but I'm saying it again anyway. The plan as of right now, unless with COVID this changes, the plan is when we have these summer camps next summer, we will have them right at Ranken. So usually what we do is we have one for a week in Ranken, St. Louis. Then we have one for a week in Ranken in Wentzville. All right. And usually two of us teach it. Me and Mr. Gudmested normally do. And Mr. Gudmested usually teaches the one in St. Louis, and I walk around and see if people have questions and the like. And then we go to Wentzville and I teach it, and he walks around and sees if people have questions. All right. You get, if you join it, you get a free lunch. In the past, they've given away t-shirts and stuff like that as well. I'm not sure if they're going to do that again in the future, but from what I've been told, that's the plan. Again, that's got a lot better chance of happening if all of you go out there and fill out those course evaluation forms. All right. And then finally, again, I had asked you to do this before. So far, only 2 of you have come in and put something in where you said what you'd like to do a website on. When we get to Friday, I'm going to ask in the morning, I'm going to give you some requirements, and I'm going to say, I'd like you to create a website that does this. I'm going to want you to try it, to try to do it yourself. It's going to be very similar to what we do in class tomorrow. So if you say, well, I can't do that, well, then just stay tuned tomorrow. All right, we'll take a look at it. Okay. Now it's way early, but my question is, does anybody have any questions on anything we went over today? All right. If not, it is 2:25. So we're ending about a half an hour early, but that's what I had for today. So thank you. I will see you tomorrow morning, bright and early at 9 o'clock.
Excuse me.
Yes.
It's not a question about this. It's just a question about your YouTube channel. What is it called again?
If you go out to YouTube, can you see YouTube on the screen right now? When I type in YouTube here?
Yeah, I see you typing.
Okay, you see YouTube? Just all you have to do is come in here and type in Jeff Scott, Ranken Technical College. All right, and that'll give you that'll give you the main one. If you want the one for this class, so just click the J. If you want the one for this class, just find the one that says Ranken Summer Academy Web Design. So that's got them. This is what's on here is just so you know. Where is it? What's in here is this is day 1. It was 4 hours and 6 minutes, and yesterday's was also about 4 hours and 6 minutes. So the one today will be about a half an hour less than that. Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions? Any other questions from anybody? All right, then I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good evening.